Hollow Knight is a remarkable game. You don't need me here to tell you that, but what I think goes underappreciated is... Actually, I can't really think of anything. Look, if we're being honest here, this is a completely unnecessary video that adds nothing to the conversation about this game, which is soon to be a series. At least, supposedly soon. This is really just an excuse for me to finally stop being a puss and beat the Godmaster DLC so I can talk about it. And also because my stupid capture card was on the fritz and I wanted to record something. And if I wasn't going to be torturing myself playing Dream Drop Distance, I was damn well going to torture myself trying to beat the Absolute Radiance. So, without further ado, let's get into things, shall we? As we start our playthrough, we get some text that was written in-universe by one Monoman the Teacher, before we see some kind of light burst from this figure. 3 masks seal a door shut as its scream echoes, and then we cut to our character, the Knight, presumably the Hollow Knight, right? The Knight sees a small bit of light below and jumps down to get there, starting gameplay. Our first area, King's Pass, can either be a boring slog that veteran players move past immediately, or an effective teaching tool not just for first-time players, but also those that have never played a Metroidvania before. Metroidvanias are known for their secrets, for their open-ended nature, and for being able to be broken or played with in every way imaginable. On the first, right at the start, we can find our first secret if we move to the left, and on the second, we can see a bit of light shining from above, hinting that we might need to come back here later when we can make it up that shaft. King's Pass ensures that we know the basic controls. Moving is self-explanatory, we can attack in every direction, we can jump, there will be stage hazards like these falling spikes, and there are ample opportunities to find more secrets and really hammer home that lesson. We learned that we'll be fighting both grounded and airborne enemies, and enemies that are in tricky spaces like this Vengefly in the secret with the spike floor. The two things that stick out to me as odd are the Lord Tablet that explains how to heal, and the inclusion of the Lifeblood Zit. There are a lot of these scattered throughout the world, and it's a welcome inclusion, I guess, but I'm not sure what the point of introducing them so soon is. Lifeblood is temporary health, as you can see by the different color, and once they're gone, they can't be healed away. As for the healing itself, I certainly like the system, with the delay acting as a kind of skill barrier to healing during combat, but for now, I'll say that I would have preferred an NPC tell me about it than to randomly see it on this Lord Tablet. In any case, as we continue on, we'll find a few more areas that we can't get to yet. This floor will drop out underneath us, and to the left you can see a little alcove that we can't access yet, and moving on a bit we can find a secret with a spike floor that we can't traverse, or at least we don't think we can if we're just starting. So we'll have to come back later after we have more abilities, or after we gain some more knowledge. When the Lord Tablets address higher beings, it's easy to assume that they refer to the player, but with the inclusion of the Godmaster DLC, that meaning can be bent to shift ever so slightly into being about the Knight for its role in that storyline. Both the text and the poem we read at the start we'll get into as we gain a fuller understanding of the world. For now though, we're given its name, the Kingdom of Hallownest. As we break down its front door, we enter Hollow Knight proper. We're immediately sent to plummet down a cliff, ensuring that we won't be getting back to King's Pass for a while, before we enter the fading town of Dirtmouth. This is our main hub area, where we'll be sending various NPCs to do different things for us. For now, it only has one resident, Elderbug, who provides a bit of lore and information about benches, at least that we should try them. Immediately, we find out that the supposedly eternal kingdom has long since died. Elderbug warns us about a sickness that has infested the bugs that remain in Hallownest, robbing them of their minds, blaming their dreams of wealth, enlightening, and glory for what befell them. Hold on to that info, it's more accurate than you might think. In any case, the only other residents are Iselda and Cornifer, map makers, though their business isn't quite open yet. For now, we need to head into Hallownest and start seeing what's going on about this sickness and such. Our first real area is the Forgotten Crossroads. Whereas King's Pass was a straight shot from A to B with a couple of nooks here and there, Crossroads starts with just that, a crossroads. Years of 2D platformers have conditioned me that right is right, so we're going right. Throughout this first visit to Crossroads, you'll see me stop to collect money, or Geo as it's called, for a few important purchases coming up. Moving right, we'll immediately come across a temple-like structure with 3 familiar masks emblazoned above the door. Upon entering, we'll find a friendly old bug named Coral, a bug that has come to this land for a good mystery. We'll be running into him several times throughout our journey in Hallownest, but for now, there isn't much else that he can offer us, so we're gonna move on. Continuing right past the temple, we pass through a room with some enemies and platforms, and then we have the choice to continue to the right or head down. We're gonna go right. If you've played Dark Souls, this is where I get to annoy you because this is just like Dark Souls. In that game, there's a really tough enemy early on in Undeadburg, which you can try and kill for a fun challenge and some cool loot. This is the same thing, though to a lesser degree. This is a Husk Guard, a tough enemy this early on, and actually one of less than like 10 that deal 2 masks of damage with every hit. Overall, he's pretty easy and much easier to handle than late game enemies that we'll see for sure. Hit and run is the best strategy right now. If we beat him, we get a bunch of Geo, and we can rescue this strange creature called a grub. For now, we don't really know what it is, but it feels good to do, so let's do it. However, we've already run into our first dead end, so let's go back and head down. Moving right, we find ourselves in an area completely unlike the Forgotten Crossroads, though no text pops up to signify a new area. This is just a prelude to an area that we'll be going to later, potentially much later. If we follow the singing, we can find another friendly bug named Mila, who is singing a very morbid song. Mila doesn't have a big impact on the story, but she seems nice enough, so we'll make a point of visiting her if we pass through this area later. Unfortunately, we can't move much past the elevator ahead. We find one of the many soul totems halfway up, I look like a dumbass, and then we come to a floor that shakes, but that we can't break right now. Returning to the crossroads, we move to the left, against all of my inclinations. If we go immediately down from here, we'll find that we're locked into this little box, with a lever to open the gates stuck beneath us, so we'll have to come back here later. Moving left instead, we'll find a grub that we can't quite reach, and then we enter a massive open room with multiple different entrances and exits. If you've been making a mental map, you'll know roughly where we are, but if you haven't, you'll know if we go up and to the right. Yep, that's right, this is the room we started in. If we go back to Elderbug, he'll notice that we've been to the Black Egg Temple, but beyond that, there's still nothing for us here. Going back to that large room, you may notice some light coming from the ceiling, but ignoring that because it's boring, let's immediately go left and enter a room that we'll be returning to a lot. This is the Grub Father, who will reward us with Geo and items for every grub that we find and rescue. Going back into the main room and dropping down the left side, we'll first find a room that leads to the Pilgrim's Way, a pathway that apparently leads to the city at the heart of Hallownest. That sounds good to me, but this fat tub of fuck won't let us through. And that's not just me being facetious either. This Elder Balder is the adult form of a small enemy that rolls around. It got so big that it lost the ability to roll with its own energy, so it's left to hurl goop and even other balders at us, which I don't even want to know how it keeps those little guys alive in its stomach acid, so we're just gonna leave and move on. Continuing down the left side, I suck, but there's another exit which leads to a room with a bunch of spikes, and a place we can't go yet, so let's go back to the main room again. Our last exit leads down, and this is the actual way that we have to go. We immediately see and hear our next friendly bug, who turns out to be Cornifer, the map maker from Dirtmouth. He explains that his wife Iselda is running the shop while he charts Hallownest, and he offers to sell a partial map for a small price, which we gladly accept. He also suggests purchasing a compass from his shop, which we also might do later. Looking at the map, we can see a few points of interest. Namely, we see both the Black Egg Temple near the top, and what looks like a beetle's head in the center. This, as it turns out, is our primary objective. Moving down to the left first, we'll come to a room with the first major stage hazard, and I just want to say that I love how this is introduced. You have this thing, a gome, that hurts you, and a Geo Rock on a platform that you can't reach. Sure, you can wait for a future ability, but if you're experimental enough as a player, you can learn to pogo off of the gome to bounce up to the platform. This not only teaches players what will become a crucial skill going forward, pogoing, but also teaches them that obstacles don't always have to be obstacles if you know what you're doing. In any case, as we continue to the left, we'll find a room with another grub, and also the first inclusion of acid. Yeah, we haven't even found water yet, and we've already come to the hazardous version of it. Interesting. The room to the right of Cornifer starts with some of the more annoying Geo Rocks in the game, but the one on the right introduces breakable walls, a mechanic that I'm not the biggest fan of, simply because I don't think they have enough of a visual hint to be good secrets. I never found a breakable wall on my own, it was always through a video like this, so either I'm bad, which is likely, let's be honest, or the effect could have been made a bit clearer. In any case, because this combat arena isn't particularly noteworthy, I want to point out how the Forgotten Crossroads is laid out, which is going to hold true for a lot of areas in Hollow Knight. Basically, we're going to be making big horseshoe-shaped routes through areas. Believe it or not, Crossroads has one of the more unusual variations of that path, because you have to travel a bit to get on it. And there's a significant secondary path that we took when we went to the right at the beginning instead of to the left into the big room. Going down and to the left leads us to some geo-rocks and a gap that we can't cross yet, while going up and to the right leads us to our first hot spring. These act as rest areas, completely refilling your masks and soul, though unlike benches, they don't act as a checkpoint if you die. Our only way forward is going down and to the right, which takes us to a large room with a bunch of golem obstacles, and a shimmering sound from a pickup that we can just barely see above us if we jump. Once again, we'll have to come back for it. What I really like about Forgotten Crossroads is that every secret or path that we don't have access to gives us hints about what we're going to be getting in the future, and when they don't show something unique, they entice the player with a shiny new thing. It embeds into the player's mind that these are things worth remembering and worth coming back to investigate, which I think is missing in a lot of other Metroidvanias, especially before the indie era. It just feels a lot more intuitive now, and Hollow Knight is a prime example of that in every aspect of its play. The next room is another 4-way decision, though moving up and to the left is just a dead end, and both directions to the right lead to the same exit. The bottom path is the standard, while the top has geo-rocks and more challenging platforming that requires either a future ability or a well-timed pogo to get across the gap. The next room is actually a 5-way intersection. Top right leads to a geo-rock, bottom left leads to an elevator that we can't open right now, bottom right leads to a side path that cuts away from our horseshoe pathing, but it's well worth doing, because it leads us to what is technically our first boss, though it's much more of a mini-boss than anything. Gruz's mother is simple. She floats around and occasionally charges at you, either just once, or repeatedly as we saw in this particular battle. In this instance alone, when she dies, her body explodes into smaller Gruzzers, which we have to kill to proceed. To the right is, say it with me, a gap that we can't cross. But if we move to the left, we'll find a house with a small bug named Sly, who appears to be suffering from the sickness that Elderbug was talking about. He mentions an Oro and an Esme before the knight's presence snaps him out of his daze, wherein he reveals that he's a merchant that wandered into Hallownest due to a dream. Now that we've saved him, he'll go up to Dirtmouth to become our general shop, which we'll definitely stop by later. While we'll get into Sly much later when his storyline is finished, one thing I'd like to point out now is Esme. This character never appears and is never mentioned again. Pre-Silksong, we don't know who or what this Esme is, which I find fascinating. It's not like Esme needs to appear for Sly's character to make sense, but that this character has history that we don't know about is great stuff that leaves him open to appear again in future titles. In any case, we've run into another dead end, so let's break this ceiling, head back, and take our final path in the 5-way room, which is to go straight up. If we go immediately to the left, we'll find ourselves in one of the many stag stations found throughout Hallownest. For a small fee, we can reactivate each stag station in turn and use them as fast travel points to get around easier. The only thing to note about the stag stations is that we're using the last stag. The rest have died out, and this one has a bit of a faulty memory. But since we have easy access to Dirtmouth, why don't we drop by and see how much has changed? Well, quite a bit has. Elderbug tells us about the 2 new shops that are open, but we already knew what they were. Entering the map shop, we find... Why, hello there. Do you, come around here often? Or, fuck, she's taken. Iselda here will sell us map-related stuff. Buy the quill so you can fill in your map and a compass if you're a first-time player. Let's get the fuck out of here! If we go into Sly's shop, we'll find that he has some ridiculously expensive stuff. A simple key for $950 and the Lumafly lantern for $1,800. Sadly, we'll have to buy the latter to progress through the game, so we're gonna need to save up big time. Though we can't afford it now, since I was a fool that bought the compass, we should come back to buy that Gathering Swarm Charm as soon as possible, because it will make collecting Geo completely mindless. Getting back to the Forgotten Crossroads via the stag station, we can find another breakable wall hiding a grub if we go up, and if we go further, we'll find that we've made it to the other side of that locked gate. To the right of the lever is a room way too dark for us to navigate, so we'll come back after we buy that lantern. One level down from that, to the right, we'll come across our first enemies that have shields, but more importantly, we'll see a strange sign. If we follow them, we'll find what looks like a tram car that appears inoperable. Moving down from here, we'll find ourselves in the room where we fought the Gruz mother, so we've made another loop. Moving to the left of the connecting shaft, we'll find the room that's meant to teach us a new technique. On a platform only reachable by a bunch of spike ledges is a grub. You might be thinking that we need another ability for this, and we can certainly wait until we have one of those. However, I believe the intended purpose for this room is to teach the player that they can pogo off of spikes. Once again reiterating the lesson that some might have learned with the Golem earlier, that obstacles can become opportunities if used correctly. With only one way left to go from the lever room, we enter to find another Husk Guard. This is what I meant when I said it's like Dark Souls to to a lesser degree, because we're actually expected to fight this guy already, unlike the Black Knights that you're arguably only supposed to fight in the endgame of Dark Souls. To the left, we'll find a few more enemies and a large arena-like room where we fight what I believe is the intended first boss, False Knight. And let me tell you, he is an excellent first boss. His big hitbox and long windups ensure that the player has ample time to adjust to his patterns. Just keep pummeling away and avoid his slams, and soon you'll have him staggered, revealing a maggot inside of the suit of armor, which is the real enemy. You go through 3 phases of attacks before False Knight breaks itself through the floor, staggers itself, and then you're able to kill it. And if you wait a minute, you'll even see that the mace he was using was actually a bug too. Interesting detail. But one thing that I really like is that you don't technically even need to fight him right now. If you're not feeling confident, you can break through the right wall after the first phase and skip him entirely. You'll miss out on both the city crest item that he drops and the chest which has a bunch of geo, but you'll be able to progress and get several more upgrades before you have to tackle him again. With False Knight defeated and with the city crest not being immediately useful, we have to move further right. Heading through the path, we'll find ourselves in an area that has masks posted on spikes that look like us, which doesn't bode well. However, the snail shaman inside this ancestral mound seems friendly enough, and even offers to give us a spell, the Vengeful Spirit, otherwise known as a fireball. However, when we pick it up, it actually knocks us unconscious, and when we awaken, we find out that the snail is actually forcing us to take care of an elder balder that's been bothering him. It's just as well, because it lets us test out our new spell. Aside from healing, this is the first ability we have that uses soul. The soul mechanic is one that I'm a huge fan of, and it's deceptively simple in how everything plays out. You hit things to gain soul, you use soul to either use a spell or heal, and then you repeat. 3 nail hits get you 1 charge of either, and you have up to 3 charges for a full soul meter. As you continue on throughout the game, you'll find that higher skill levels equate to much more aggressive play, and this system seems to be designed with this in mind. It's an excellent feedback loop of gaining and losing that just hits the nail on the head for me and for a lot of other people. But in any case, we run into that Elder Balder, hit it with 4 fireballs, grab us a nifty little charm on the way out, and go on our merry way. Down and to the right, we find a lever that leads us back into Cornifer's room, and if we head up, we'll conveniently be heading into the direction of that Pilgrim's Way that was blocked by the other Elder Balder. If we take care of him, we will find a bunch more acid. And real quick, before I went too far away, I went back and bought that Gathering Swarm charm, and equipped it and the charm we got in the Ancestral Mound, Soul Catcher, which increases the amount of soul I gain from every hit. And that, my friends, is the extent of the Forgotten Crossroads. See, that wasn't so bad, was it? And if you're worried, no, I'm not going to be going through every area in as excruciating of detail. If you're using this as a guide for 112% completion, I'm trusting that you can get from A to B on your own. Just explore every path available and find whatever you can. For those worried about actually getting from A to B, our next area, Greenpath, actually still holds your hand quite a bit. Early on, you'll see a bug that I don't feel conflictingly horny about, and she'll lead you through the intended route through the area, which is another small switch from what will become normal. Instead of a single horseshoe, you do another mini horseshoe at the end of the first. However, if you don't follow this bug, there's still plenty to discover and stuff that you can actually do. For one, there's an optional mini-boss in Not This Hunter, who gives you the game's bestiary, but the massive Moss Charger. You'll see that I didn't even find this guy on my first run through of Greenpath actually, so I have a lot more stuff. Greenpath is also the first area in the game that has significant lore attached to it. The Forgotten Crossroads, I feel, intentionally didn't have lore attached because they were forgotten. They were where the weakest of bugs resided, having wandered in for fame and glory. You also have the parasites living there, such as the maggot infecting the armor in False Knight. Meanwhile, Greenpath is lush and gorgeous and intoxicating. Through the various lore tablets that we find throughout the area, we learn that it doesn't really belong in the kingdom of Hallownest at all, in that it wasn't originally part of the kingdom. Instead of the pale being that the tablets speak of, Greenpath was made by a being called Un, who dreamed of Leaf and cast these caverns so. We also learn, though this could be interpreted as figurative, that the Moss tribe of bugs, those wielding equipment in Greenpath, come from that very dream and into the physical world, and they're awaiting Un to take them back into the dream. With this and with Elderbug earlier, we see a recurring motif of dreams and their effects on bugs. First, they drove them to their deaths within the ruins of Hallownest, and now we see them acting as conduits to bring bugs into the real world via the dreams of a higher being. Now, I don't see the lore in Hollow Knight as being particularly deep. They were obviously heavily influenced by the likes of Dark Souls and its method of storytelling, but Hollow Knight doesn't try and hit the same emotional or philosophical beats as FromSoft's masterpiece trilogy. Hollow Knight is content to tell a fairly straightforward story in a slightly obtuse way, which I want to emphasize is not a bad thing. For me, this is actually a positive, because it lets me get to why I play it, the gameplay, without having to stop and be bored and or confused by the cutscenes from the Soul series. Would I have personally liked a more complex and deep story from Hollow Knight? Sure, but do I think that this is sufficient? Absolutely. With that said, I very much like the idea, taken from Dark Souls, that we are a small piece of the world making a large impact. The Knight's role in the story is yet to be revealed, but for now, I want to offer that bit of praise. One thing to note about Greenpath is that we come across the best character in Hollow Knight, Zote the Mighty. He is a renowned knight that has slain many a beast, but we find him on an off day in the hands of a fearsome beast that will take all that we have to overcome. God, Zote is so cool. I love the way he talks down to us, saying we're scurrying about because that's all we're doing. We are bugs after all. But man, it's just such a negative connotation and he's just so cool. Anyway, we really don't want to fuck with this sexy hunk. Lifeender is way too cool of a name to mess with that weapon, so we're gonna do what he says and leave him be before he cuts us in half with one blow. At the end of Greenpath, we come to what I believe is the first of 3 roadblocks in the base game. Hornet. This sweet mama is a tough one, but sorry Hornet, I have a new waifu. She calls us a ghost and presumes what we're aiming to do in Hallownest, which is strange because we don't even know what we're doing in Hallownest. At this point, we're just exploring. However, she seems to be uninfected and has noticed the sickness just like Elderbug, so we know she's a bit more aware than most that we've seen. Hornet, like I said, is the first major roadblock. You can skip every boss up to this point, but barring glitches and exploits, you cannot progress any farther without defeating her. For so early in the game, Hornet moves incredibly fast, with jumps, dashes, throwing her nail, and an AoE attack. Now, unlike in something like Kingdom Hearts 2, I can't sit here and tell you about specific weaknesses that different bosses have, or how to specifically avoid or negate damage. This game is all about using your limited options to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And right now, you're at your most limited, so you just have to get good. After we defeat her, the knight lookalike in the background falls and drops the Mothwing cloak, allowing us to dash around as our first movement upgrade. However, just after, we're assailed by 3 mysterious beings that, if you've been paying attention, should have familiar masks atop their heads. They say contradictory things, but give us our first real objective: break the seals that bind them to their sleep. While we don't know how to do that quite yet, we do know that we have to do it. As we go through the dash tutorial area, I want to praise Hollow Knight for its placement of the Hornet fights, once again comparing it to Dark Souls, though I actually think Hollow Knight did it better. The equivalent to the Hornet fight in Dark Souls would be the Bell Gargoyles. Third major boss, you have optional enemies and areas to explore in the meantime, if you don't think you're ready for them right away, etc. And Bell Gargoyles is a good fight, don't get me wrong. However, they're more a test of how well you've explored and how much you've upgraded your weapon than a test of skill, i.e. they're mostly a DPS check. However, Hollow Knight holds off its DPS check until much later in the game. So, Hornet instead becomes the game planting its feet and saying, alright, we've taken it easy on you so far, now it's time to get serious. And then it doesn't let you progress until you've proven that you can handle the rest of the game, because the rest of it doesn't get any easier. Oh no, on the contrary. There are 3, technically 4 major roadblocks that I can count that the game uses to test whether you can handle future areas. The most successful by far is Hornet. The end of Greenpath sees us arrive at the Lake of Un, which is impossible until we get further upgrades. Inside of the altar at its shore, we find Quirrell again. He doesn't say anything particularly noteworthy other than point out that this building was likely once a place of worship. Unlike with Vendril Spirit and the Forgotten Crossroads, the dash in Greenpath actually opens up quite a few secrets immediately. If we go right from where we supposedly rescued Zote, though I know in my heart that he would have been fine if we hadn't done anything, we'll find a chest with 1 Geo, nice, which then leads into an encounter with 2 Baldurs, which, after Hornet, man, that was apparently just too much for me to handle. However, if we beat them, we get the Baldur's Shell Charm. If we head towards the middle of Greenpath, we can also go through this spike cavern with weird electrical bursts to get the Thorns of Agony charm. And as we exit Greenpath, we see that we're already close to being able to afford that Lumafly lantern from Sly. Especially with the Gathering Swarm charm, Geocollection is a mindless mechanic that I don't really have much to say about, though the death mechanic associated with it I'll go into later. Back in the Crossroads, if we go down and to the right from the big room, and then down and to the left in the next, we'll find a gap that we weren't able to cross without a dash. Once we do, we'll find ourselves in the next intended area. Fungal Wastes is a strange area. There doesn't seem to be much lore behind it. It just appears to be another biome within Hallownest, with no real explanation for why it became the way that it is. Especially considering its proximity to the capital city, it makes you wonder why this area wasn't placed lower geographically. Maybe underneath the Waterways as like a diseased area that has been contaminated by the refuse that leaks from the sewers underneath the city. Alas, we don't really have that. Early on, we can find a friendly bug named a Leg Eater who, for a small price, allows us to buy some of the most broken charms in the game. Fragile Strength, Fragile Heart, and Fragile Greed. These charms all break upon death, though they can be repaired by Leg Eater if we bring them back to him. But what they do is boost your nail damage, give you 2 extra masks of health without caveats, and increase the amount of geo dropped by enemies. They are absolutely ridiculous, and with DLC, they got even crazier, but we'll get into that eventually. Going down and to the right, we run into an encounter that doesn't even count as a mini-boss, against these 2 mushroom enemies that act kind of like the Elder Balder of the Fungal Wastes. I don't really have much to say about them because I just burn them down with spells every time I run into them. Just don't forget to go a little bit farther and open up this lever. You'll thank me later for reminding you. Anyway, the reward you get for this encounter is absolutely insane, a charm notch. You start with 3, and you can get up to 10 in the base game and 11 with DLC. Right here, it allows us to have both the Gathering Swarm and the Fragile Strength charms on, which is really nice for going through this area. Just like in Crossroads and Greenpath, there are rooms where you have to choose between fighting enemies or platforming. There are acid pools just like in Greenpath, but there's not really much to talk about that's unique in Fungal Wastes. That is, until we reach the Bouncing Spores. Although there isn't a lot to say about them mechanically, they're a unique feature of the Wastes. Only 2 other entities in the game have this bouncing property when you hit them with your nail, so I figured it was worth mentioning them. Just before the room with the bouncing spores, we run into another friendly bug named Cloth for the first time. Cloth is absolutely adorable, a gentle giant if ever there was one in Hallownest. Though she longs to be a brave adventurer, we'll find as we encounter her more that she's a bit of a coward at heart, although the tale is significantly more tragic than that sentence may lead you to believe. A bit further in, we'll find Hornet again, leading us to the right. If we look at the sign, we'll read that we've reached the end of Pilgrim's Way. I don't like this, because if this is supposed to be a path that travelers take from the outside and into the capital of Hallownest, the path is broken. You go into Greenpath, and then you have to backtrack through Crossroads, down into Fungal Wastes, and then in the city? Then why wasn't the sign for the Pilgrim's Way at the beginning of Fungal Wastes? I don't know, it just seems like a gameplay element, meant to drive the player into certain areas, which is fine, I guess, but I would have liked if it made sense even a little bit. I guess you could make the argument that it was meant to lead through Greenpath down into Fog Canyon, which we've yet to see, and then into Fungal Waste to the Queen Station, which again we'll see later, but given the close proximity to the Stag Station that Hornet is in, and how far that path is from the endpoint of Greenpath progression, I don't really buy it. In any case, we unfortunately can't cross the gap that Hornet is leading us through, so we'll have to buff ourselves up a bit first. Going further down, disparate paths lead to more grubs, a few levers, and then to tougher enemies in the Mantis tribe. The aerial variant doesn't pose much of a threat, but the grounded enemies are fast and cover a lot of distance with their dash, along with taking quite a bit of punishment for a regular enemy. Thankfully, you're never forced to fight them, but both variants drop a healthy amount of geo, so it's usually worth it if you're up to the task. If we head all the way down from here, we'll find a bench and a path that leads to a crying bug. We'll come back here shortly, don't worry. For now, we just need to head to the left here and enter the Mantis village proper, where we immediately jump down a gap that we can't make back up. If we head all the way to the right, killing the bugs we find as we go, we'll come to a lever that will open the way forward. Going back and taking the upper path this time, we need to navigate some jumps while being harassed by mantises, but if we make it all the way to the shiny at the end of the mini gauntlet, we'll be met with perhaps the best upgrade in the entire game, the Mantis Claw, which lets us wall jump. The second upper path gives us plenty of practice with it and leads to a bunch of geo rocks and another lever. This one, though we don't see it, opens up the floor which leads deeper into the Mantis village. Being careful to avoid the spikes in the mantises, we need to navigate this left side to open up all the levers, which leads to a boss fight. These are the Mantis Lords, and they would be a major roadblock to progression if they were required to defeat. As is, however, they block one of the paths to another area, and a bunch of loot that isn't necessary. However, as Hollow Knight is largely about the excellent boss battles, these fine ladies are a great challenge. However, they're really hard, so we die to them. The death mechanic is one that I don't particularly like, because it always ends up on one of two extremes. Either it is insanely punishing, and one of the most brutal mechanics in a Metroidvania, or it's barely an inconvenience, and just a time waster. All of that is dependent on player skill. For beginners, dying is going to happen often, and it's going to hurt you in your Geo game, because if you can't recover your shade without dying again, you lose all of your collected Geo. However, for experienced players, they aren't going to die hardly at all in places that it matters, so what's the point? It was just a poorly thought out system that punishes the wrong type of player. On our way back to the Mantis Lords, we can run into Quirrell again. This is honestly one of my favorite moments in the game, not only for how much it endears me to Quirrell for how helpful and concerned he is toward the knight, but also for how well it hints to the player about their options. As of right now, the player does not know whether the Mantis Lords are required or not. For all we know, they could be hiding another upgrade. However, Quirrell is set up here to remind us of the type of game that this is. Hornet was a roadblock, yes, but this isn't. We can go explore other places and get stronger before we take on the Mantis Lords. He even lets us know about the nailsmith that we'll find later. Now that said, we're going to completely ignore Quirrell's advice and continue on to beat these bitches up. As may not be surprising, I love the Mantis Lords fight. You can see 3 back there in the beginning, but at first only 1 will come to fight you. This is a unique version of a mechanic that has other permutations within this game, that have difficulty scaling throughout the fight. With Hornet earlier, there were instances where she became staggered. This is a mechanic that several other bosses share, and those that don't are considered some of the more difficult ones in the game. It's there so that the player can have a dedicated period to heal off damage, and I use this many a time, even as a bit more experienced of a player. Sometimes, you just need it. Here with the Mantis Lords, instead of simply getting staggered, the fight starts easier by only having one of them attack you. This allows you to have a more controlled environment to learn their attack patterns before there's a big jump in difficulty when you defeat the first, and then the remaining 2 come after you at once. The Lords can dash at you, dive at you, and shoot sword beams at you either high or low. That's literally it. This fight really is a testament to how much you can do with very little. They have 4 attacks, you have 2 with your Nail and Vengeful Spirit, and yet this fight remains one of the more mechanically complex simply due to the level of execution required when compared to many earlier fights. Unlike them, there are no gimmicks, it's just you versus the Lords. It's awesome. And speaking of awesome, we also get some lore associated with both the Fungal Wastes and the Mantis Village locations. When this pale being moved into Hallownest, the Mushroom Tribe of Bugs accepted the pale being's rule for its protection. However, the Mantis Tribe resented the invaders and only agreed to a truce. They could keep their territory without issue so long as they held the bugs within Deepnest at bay. Deepnest is an extremely hostile area that we'll get to later. I really like this aspect of the lore. This pale being supposedly was a great good to the kingdom of Hallownest, and yet here we have this entire race of bugs rejecting them. And not only that, the Mantis Tribe was so strong that they were able to resist the infection that spread throughout the rest of Hallownest. It adds a lot of flavor to these otherwise pretty standard enemies and boss, but I do wish there was more to do with the Mantises, like if there was an NPC that we meet a few times like Quirrell or Cloth. For defeating the Mantis Lords, you gain access to the doorway to their left, which I never actually went through at this point. It leads to the Deepnest, but there isn't much for us to do there at the moment, so we'll head to where we know we can progress. That said, now that we've defeated their lords, the Mantises are all passive toward us now. We can still kill them, and we'll have to if we want to finish the Hunter's Journal that we got in Greenpath, but for now what this means is that we can access that loot I talked about earlier. In the larger room, we get to climb up the right side and head through the transition. If we came here before, the Mantis directly above us would have hit that lever and shut us out. But now that we've defeated the Lords, we have free access to a bunch of Geo and the Mark of Pride charm. Really quick before we move on, let's head back the way we came and head back down to that room I said we'd shortly return to. We could have gotten this Dashmaster charm before getting the Mantis Claw, but now that we do have that upgrade, we can go through this fake wall and participate in a little climbing gauntlet to rescue Bretta. She isn't particularly important to the larger narrative, but saving her will unlock a few things up in Dirtmouth soon, and she's kind enough on top of that. Going back to the village and heading up, we find a room with a strange tree. To the left, we're reminded that we can't quite get everywhere yet, and if we explore around a bit, we can find a room where Claw gets us to the Spore Shroom charm, which, believe it or not, will be important to get to one of the game's endings. However, beyond that, we've pretty much exhausted all that we can do here in the Fungal Wastes, so let's head back to that room where Hornet left us and, with our newfound wall jump ability, traverse the gaps in the bridge. It should be noted that if you skipped False Knight earlier, this is the point that you'll need to go back and fight him, as we use the City Crest item he drops to open the way to the capital of Hallownest. As was the case with the Mantis village, we're blocked from leaving this area once we move past a certain threshold. However, this isn't quite as obvious as before, because it looks like you can climb up and go through a hidden upper path to get back, only to be blocked by the same kind of shaking floor that we saw way back in the Forgotten Crossroads, specifically in that crystalline area. Here in this capital city, we're once again making a general horseshoe shape, though there are several useful detours that we can go down if we so choose. First, we meet Quirrell again. If his helping us against the Mantis Lords didn't sway you to his side, just how chill he is and how much he cares here should, as he warns against the patrolling enemies below us. Indeed, we're about to fight some of the tougher and more annoying enemies in the game, and my personal least favorite, the Flying Husk Guards, both the sword and spear variants. Both have a nasty habit of running away from you and being generally a pain in the ass to hit at all times. However, we will have some help. Dropping down to the bottom here, we find a sign that will lead us left to the Nailsmith. For a small fee, he'll upgrade our nail, increasing the damage we'll do, and we can receive further upgrades if we bring him back something called Pale Ore, so we'll definitely be sure to do that. The enemies outside have one variety that will be helpful for testing it on, where with each subsequent upgrade, one more of them will die in one hit, so that's a cool bit of enemy placement. Moving to the right, we'll find a few more signs, this key-shaped slot which leads to nothing of note, I promise, and moving further right, we find Hornet once again, as she drops in next to this statue. Say goodbye to her, because this will be the last time we meet for a long, long time. This is the statue of the Hollow Knight. Yes, the knight, our character, isn't the titular one. We learned that the Hollow Knight was sacrificed in some way to keep Hallownest alive, a gambit which obviously paid dividends considering its current state. We'll discuss the Hollow Knight much later, but for now, let's continue our horseshoe from this detour. In the large room to the left, we can climb up these platforms to get into the city past the lock gate from before. Immediately inside, we can drop down a gate and allow easy access to another friendly bug, Lem. Not all secrets in this game lead to charms, notches, or some other permanent upgrade. Most actually lead to what the game refers to as relics. Wanderer's Journals, Hallownest Seals, King's Idols, and only 4 times in the game, Arcane Eggs. Up until now, they've been useless, but here, Lem will purchase them from us, and he gives us a ton of geo for our efforts. More than anything, this is where you'll be making most of the geo throughout the adventure, especially later when getting to him is going to be a cakewalk. It's also why I had no qualms spending geo on that nail upgrade and the leg eater charms when I know I'll need to buy the Lumafly lantern. I knew I would make it back here, and I did, even when I only had 2 relics. In any case, moving back up, we can find the way forward, battling the city's guards along the way, and opening gates to return to later. As we go through this area, I want to stop for a minute and appreciate the music. The Hollow Knight soundtrack is completely amazing across the board. Christopher Larkin knocked it out of the park on basically every track imaginable, and with one exception, I think no song is better than the one that plays in the City of Tears. I can't do it justice, I'm just going to let it play a bit as we run through this area. Enjoy. Up above, we can find Cornifer and a bench that comes with a fee, and a bit below that we can find our next destination, the Soul Sanctum. There's a breakable wall here at the start which leads back to Cornifer and the bench, but beyond that, this is a relatively straightforward area of A to B, with some enemies to fight, levers to hit, and one of the best charms in the game to acquire. The Spell Twister charm is insane. It lets you cast 4 spells off of 1 full soul meter as opposed to 3, drastically increasing your damage potential. Note that this doesn't apply to healing, but hey, they had to balance it somehow. In any case, here at the end, we have our next boss, Soulmaster, our second major roadblock in the game. Now, technically you don't have to fight him now, but there isn't much in the way of useful upgrades that you can get before you do. The Soul Sanctum area has done its best to prepare you for this fight with its projectile-spitting enemies, but none were as fast or dangerous as this cute little kitty here. This boss does have a pretty big flaw, however, in that a lot of his attacks can be avoided if you just rush him down. His projectiles will rarely hit you if you quickly dash toward where he teleports, and those that don't move slow enough for you to react to with only a bit of practice. I like the Soulmaster fight, but I don't think it's anywhere near close to the level of Hornet or Mantis Lords. However, it is unique in that it's one of the few bosses with a dedicated phase change, facilitated by a fake out death no less, so, that's something. After breaking through the floor, he will repeatedly dive at you and then stay still while constantly shooting you with projectiles. Honestly, with the Mothwing Cloak, this phase is just a formality. Nothing really to see here. However, as the first and only upgrade that we received directly from killing a boss, we now have the Desolate Dive ability, our second magic spell. It's also arguably the best one, as it's the only spell that we get that has invincibility frames, making it extremely safe in almost every circumstance while also doing great damage. However, instead of talking about Dive, which we'll get into after we get our last magic spell, I want to discuss the City of Tears and, more specifically, the Soul Sanctum. Despite this area's name, the main boss, and the operatic music, there's not really much to say about it. Weird, I know. In short, it was a research hub where they were trying to unlock the secrets of the mind and obtain pure focus. When the infection spread, Soulmaster thought that the best way to combat it was Soul, the energy that animated the bodies of bugs. In the end, this wasn't the case, as all of the researchers succumbed to the infection, just like the rest of Hollownest. And that's about where the story ends. However, there is a wonderfully dark element to everything here. There are white blobs that you'll find scattered throughout the Soul Sanctum, and context clues, along with looking at their designs and comparing it to the other enemies you face here, gives us an indication that these mistakes and follies, yes, that's their official names, were researchers that were transformed by their extreme experiments. This idea is further expanded upon in the Soulmaster fight, when the second phase takes place in what looks like a mass grave for their victims. On our way out of the City of Tears, moving up and left from Cornifer, we run into... Oh my god. He can even repel the rain around him with sheer willpower. That's fucking tight. He also finally says what's what about Hollownest. Of course it fell to ruin with such back-asswards design. I can't be around him for too long. My heart simply beats too fast for him to withstand for more than moments at a time. In any case, for the first time, the ability you get from an area doesn't have an immediate analog on which to use it. We can still find things like another of those strange trees, and in this side room we can find our first simple key. If we go up and then to the left, we can find an elevator with a toll which freezes my fucking game. Now, this isn't a problem with Hollow Knight itself, and if you don't mess with your files like I did, then this won't happen. I just had some bad mods installed, so once I removed them, everything worked fine. Hollow Knight, in general, is a very stable game, so don't worry about that. In any case, later, I get to the top of the elevator shaft, and to the left you'll find your first vessel fragment, of which there are 9 in the game. To the right of the elevator, at the bottom and not the top, is another stag station, which we'll use to run back to Dirtmouth since we have no clear destination otherwise, for perhaps the first time in the game. First though, I'm going to head back to the Forgotten Crossroads stag for a quick detour. In the room where we fought Gruzmother, if we jump dash to the right, we'll find this house that holds... choices. Do I reveal all of my fetishes? In any case, Salubra here will sell us charms and charm notches. I bought the first 2 notches available and the Shaman Stone charm, which will be useful a bit later in order to make my first real charm build of the game. Charm build is a loose term which basically just means which playstyle you're going for. Up until now, my Fragile Strength charm signified a nail-focused build, because the charm buffed my nail damage. However, if I were to equip the Shaman Stone charm, which buffs spell damage, I could have a spell-focused build, as 2 basic examples. They get more complicated as you get more charms and notches, but I figured I would mention it here because I think I'm going to mention it like 2 times later on, and even then it's just passing mentions, so they exist. However, while we are here in Forgotten Crossroads, I recall an area filled with spikes that I might be able to traverse now that I have the ability to wall jump. And on our way, we also have this little Golem Gauntlet available in order to get our first Mask Shard, of which there are 16 in the game. Moving back to that large room, we can take the lower left transition and use our wall jump to finally get a tutorial for looking down, and also to get to a new mini-boss, the Brooding Moloch. This is the first fight that we've encountered that I don't particularly like. As you can see, I nearly died here because I just wanted to damage tank and end it quickly. It spits goo both in single blobs and a half-screen spray, it jumps and slams at you, and it also swipes at you. This swipe comes out deceptively fast and has a larger hitbox than you might think, resulting in me taking a lot of unnecessary hits over the many times I fought this guy. However, he doesn't have a lot of health, so he's not really that bad, just annoying. For defeating him, we get another Mask Shard. While we're here, we can also get yet another Mask Shard from the Grubfather, along with some Geo and the Grub Song charm for all of the grubs we've collected from our elite exploration skills. And now finally, we can return to Dirtmouth. Immediately upon leaving Crossroads, we run into a bug named Tiso, a Zote wannabe that claims to know of a place to test one's skills as a warrior. Now this asshole tries to be all cool and mysterious and shit, but he really can't compare to the mighty Zote. The mighty. Though we can't talk to Bretta on the bench, speaking to Elderbug gives us a hint as to another area that we can explore. However, the real reason we're here is because of Sly, because we can finally buy... well, we can afford this too. Yeah, we went from 0 to 4 mask shards really fast, didn't we? I didn't really plan for this, it just kind of worked out with the rewards we were getting, but it's definitely going to be nice to have an extra mask of health going forward. In any case, we purchased the Lumify lantern, and from here, we can go in a bunch of different directions. We have the wall jump, so we can go back to King's Pass if we so desire. We have a simple key to using that slot down in the City of Tears, or we can explore a bit more with our newfound abilities. As far as I'm concerned, we've entered the mid-game, and the hand-holding is finally over. What I've elected to do is follow Elderbug's directions and head to the peak of Hallownest. To do that, we're going to go back to that crystalline room and stop by to see Mila. She's stopped singing and starts talking about a dangerous light. Man, we really have to stop this infection before she succumbs to it too. She was so nice. In any case, with our newfound dive ability, we can break through the rumbling floor and immediately collect a rancid egg. They're pretty useless, and then we drop down into our next area. I'm gonna be honest, Crystal Peak is the first area that I'm not overly fond of. Oftentimes I like and dislike certain areas depending on my mood, even the more annoying ones that we'll see later in our journey through Hallownest, but I'm never really in the mood to go to Crystal Peak. Perhaps it's simply because this is one of the only areas without a proper boss somewhere inside. I mean, it has a punching bag masquerading as one, but no proper boss. Still, thankfully, it is probably the easiest area barring the Forgotten Crossroads to navigate. You go up, and you go down, with small detours along the way, such as getting the shopkeeper's key, or going to the mini-boss I mentioned, Crystal Guardian. It screams, raining down lasers, and it shoots them at you sometimes. Just keep hitting it, there isn't really much else to say. The only interesting thing about this guy is that he's the first boss so far besides Hornet, who is clearly a plot-critical character, to not die after the boss fight. Really, the only interesting thing that happened in my playthrough of Crystal Peak is that I equipped both Spell Twister and Shaman Stone here, making my first real build of the game, but that's something I could have done in any of the next 3 areas before it actually mattered. We run into Quirrell again, but he doesn't say anything of substance, so there's not much there for me to go off of either. Now on your way down the other side of the horseshoe, you'll run into this strange looking sign, and in the room beyond, you'll find a dead bug hanging from the ceiling. I'm not quite sure what this means, but when you make it past the laser and platforming gauntlet just after this, you'll come to the next upgrade to your movement, Crystal Heart, which allows us to super dash, which is easily my least favorite movement upgrade, simply because there's next to no mechanical depth to it, at least when it comes to combat. Every other movement ability, dash, wall jump, and one other that we'll be getting eventually, is useful for positioning in combat, and feels so invaluable that playing without them feels incredibly neutered. Super dash is something that I can live without, and has exactly one use, yet it's required to beat the game. Not a fan. As we go down the rest of the right side of Crystal Peak, I suppose I can talk about its lore, though there's not much to it either. Basically, it drove the economy of Hallownest. I do really like that there is an explanation at all for the riches that this kingdom seemed to have accrued during its reign, and I also like the little tidbit about these crystals having a kind of intangible fiery energy within them, but very little is done with this other than explaining why there are crystal lasers everywhere. It's tedious. If we drop down and go to the right out of Crystal Peak, we'll find a dark room and then a gap that we need to use Crystal Dash to cross. Once we do, we'll find ourselves in the Crystal Mound, which is similar to the Ancestral Mound that we saw all the way back in the Forgotten Crossroads. And, just like that one, we have a spell waiting for us as a reward for completing it. However, unlike the last one, which gave an entirely new spell, this mound upgrades a spell that we already have. And in this particular case, it upgrades our Desolate Dive into Descending Dark. This is absolutely bonkers. Dive is already one of the most busted abilities we get in the game because of its invincibility and good damage, and now we have an even better, larger, more damaging version of it. I have no idea why Team Cherry would ever put this so close to when we get Dive, or even why we get this so early into the game considering its strength, but hey, I'm not complaining about the extra firepower. However, with that, we are already done with Crystal Peak. Dropping down this large gap, we'll come to what looks like a graveyard with an altar with 3 familiar masks in the room to the right. Once we reach this altar, we'll be trapped in a strange prison. Upon reading the inscription, which reads very similarly to the statue dedicated to the Hollow Knight, we find out the name of those mysterious beings that we've seen popping up throughout the game. The Dreamers, Monoman the Teacher, Lurien the Watcher, and Hera the Beast. Just then, the Dreamers attack us, questioning what drew the knight back to Hallownest. Once again, what they say contradicts itself, saying that the seal must not break and yet should be broken, before dragging the knight into a strange land. However, we're soon found by another being that leads us along a path of floating rocks, and eventually it reveals that the knight has been brought into a dream. This creature offers us a way out, a talisman that can cut through the veil between dreams and waking. Upon taking it, we awaken inside the home of a moth, the last of the moth tribe. For now, we don't get much explanation as to what happened, but this moth, the seer, at least explains 2 things concretely. The dream nail has dulled over time and must be restored, and that despite that, the dreamers are vulnerable to its power. It's quite frankly insane how much just opened up for us to do. To quickly go over the dream nail's applications, you can hit enemies with it to gain 1 spell's worth of soul without damaging them, which has more uses than you might think. It can also be used to peer into the thoughts of bugs we use it on, providing a bit more context as to what they tell us in dialogue, or even just using it on enemies will reveal a little bit of their thoughts, scattered as they might be. Finally, it allows us to see spirits who still linger on after death. To find one of these spirits, we can return to that mass grave from before. Whereas it was empty when we first dropped down, now that we have the dream nail, a ghost appears, Zero, who was heavily implied to have been killed for disobeying the king of Hallownest, that pale being we've heard so much about. We can challenge his spirit to a duel wherein he floats around and shoots swords at us, and when we defeat him, he resigns his will to us and becomes 100 essence, which is conveniently how much the seer asked us to collect. On our way back, in addition to getting the worst charm in the game from a hidden wall on the left, we finally learn the purpose of those strange trees that we've seen throughout our adventure. Using the dream nail on them spawns red orbs for us to collect, which gives us essence. While these dream trees were useful upon the game's first version, there has since been DLC released that renders them obsolete for the purposes of essence collection. Still, they're decent platforming challenges, I guess, so we'll do them if we ever come across them. As with the Grubfather for grubs, Nailsmith for pale ore, and Salubra for charms, the seer will have rewards for us for collecting a certain thing. In this case, essence. For now, however, we are done with the seer. We'll be returning later with more essence so we can get more stuff. To continue, we can simply exit via the stag station we find, we can head to the left of the grave where Zero was, or we can head down to the bottom of this room and dive through this floor. This brings us to a confusing series of traps and tunnels which have a really tough enemy for this point in the game, but if we explore far enough to the right, we'll come across the Soul Eater charm, a direct upgrade from the Soul Catcher charm that we got in the Ancestral Mound back in Forgotten Crossroads. As well, we can find the long-forgotten home of the Grey Mourner, a character with more background than you might first assume. For now, all we learn is that she's in mourning, and wishes for us to deliver a gift to the grave of her dead lover, whose grave resides among her enemies in the Queen's Lush Refuge. While we have found a lush area in Greenpath, it certainly didn't belong to no queen, so we're gonna have to refuse this until we find the area she's looking for. As we head to the left out of this tunnel network, I want to talk about the Grey Mourner and a few other characters that we have and will run into later. As we explore, we will learn of the 5 Great Knights of Hallownest. These are characters important to the history of the kingdom, but as of present day have been reduced to mere set dressing. In fact, we've already run into one and not even realized it. Our very first boss, False Knight, was a maggot inside of a suit of armor. That armor belonged to one of the knights, Hegemal. His current whereabouts unknown if the maggot didn't just kill him for the suit. This is why False Knight drops a city crest when it was clearly a parasite inside of the armor. It used to belong to a renowned knight of Hallownest who would have access to the City of Tears. The Grey Mourner is another of the 5 Great Knights, formerly known as Zemmer. As with all of the knights, not much is known about her exploits, but it's mentioned later that she was something of a storyteller, and we know that she had a forbidden love that ultimately ended in tragedy. And that's the theme of the 5 Great Knights, tragedy. Hegemal had his armor stolen at best, in which case he fled Hallownest in disgrace, or he was murdered for it, in which case it would have been a dishonorable death due to the maggot lacking the strength to fight fairly. Similarly, Zemmer had a Romeo and Juliet-esque story of forbidden love, and her story becomes even more tragic when we learn more about that lover and its kin. As we encounter them, we will go more into the tragedy of the other knights in turn, but I figured I would bring them up as a group now that we've encountered 2 of them. As you can see from the footage that's been playing, there isn't a lot to the resting grounds area, as we've already explored the full extent of it. If we go back to that elevator we passed and head down it, we'll find ourselves back in the City of Tears, though in a markedly more regal area with its red aesthetic than we were in before, which had a much drearier color palette. We're not going to be spending much time here, but if we head up from this first room, we'll find ourselves in a fairly tough mob gauntlet which rewards us with another vessel fragment. Moving down, we'll find ourselves in the King's Station, which holds another stag station for us to use. To the left, we'll find ourselves facing what I consider to be the toughest enemies in the game, Husk Knights, that deal 2 masks of damage per hit. We can also finally open the locked gate from before if we head further left, but the main attraction for this visit to the city is definitely the unique enemy that we can find in one of the houses, the Gorgeous Husk, which drops several hundred geo for you upon death. However, beyond that, there isn't actually a whole lot for us to do here. Our next destination is below the city. But first, I'm just going to take a quick detour back to Dirtmouth where Elderbug actually tells us about that next area. Now, in Crystal Peak, we found a shopkeeper's key, and since the only shopkeep we know is Sly, we're going to give it to him and drastically increase his options. The one that we're after right now is the Elegant Key, which is a fairly pricey 800 geo, but I promise that this will be worth it. I also went ahead and bought a few charms and a vessel fragment to complete our first, which is an extra storage space for soul collected from enemies, and beyond that there's not much to say about him. In any case, we're going to head back to the city's storeroom stag, and make our way back down to where we found Cornifer in the City of Tears. Going through the gap we made and heading up the elevator leads us to a door that we can use the Elegant Key on. This leads us to a sub-area where we can fight another soul warrior from the Soul Sanctum, who is decidedly tougher this time, but still not that big of an issue. Above him, we can find another snail shaman like we saw in both of the mounds that we've been to, having been experimented upon by the Soul Sanctum researchers. Upon examination, it explodes into darkness, which is then absorbed by the night, upgrading our vengeful spirit into the Shade Soul, its more powerful variant. While that's it to this area, it does add another hint of darkness to the Soul Sanctum, as we now know that they weren't just experimenting on themselves, but also presumably unwilling prisoners as well, in their efforts to harness the power of Soul. With the Shade Soul in hand, however, it's time to continue on, diving deeper still into Helluva. Going back to the King's Station stag, moving left, and going to the lower left exit out of the big city room, we'll come to a long shaft-like room that's filled with spikes. Upon reaching the bottom, we find that it was an elevator shaft that's since been abandoned. Moving further in, we find writhing masses of bugs, and general disarray and refuse galore. This is an area that's clearly been forgotten, and that's kind of the theme for Ancient Basin. This is perhaps the least complex area in terms of things that we need to do, because most of it is just a combat area and a boss. Near Cornifer at the start, we can find a fountain that asks for all of our geo, but I literally just used most of mine to buy stuff, so we'll come back to that later. Heading down, we come to a door with a strange mark emblazoned on it. The lore tablet next to it reads that what lies beyond is the birthplace of what they refer to as a pure vessel. Context clues might tip you off as to what this is referring to, but we'll find out more of it later. For now, all we know is that whoever made this place, presumably the Pale King, clearly regrets and avoids what lies beyond that door. To the left, we'll find a gap that we need Crystal Heart to cross, and beyond that is a larger series of rooms which have Molochs inside. Less dangerous than its brooding cousin, but there are more of them to deal with here. Though there's a simple key in a hole, there's not much to mention beyond that. However, beyond this room lies what I consider to be the last major roadblock of the game, our next boss, Broken Vessel. If the Mantis Lord's fight was a spiritual duel of equals, then Broken Vessel is a literal one. It can dash at you, it has a dive like you, and it has an attack where it repeatedly shoots out infected orbs at the knight. For this point in the game, its attacks are fast, and beyond when you can stagger it, there isn't a whole lot of downtime, especially with the ghosts that hover around it every so often. However, with our upgraded spells, we do an insane amount of damage, and I clearly know this fight too well. My first playthrough, I got stuck here a fair few times, so don't feel bad if it takes you a while. Beyond Broken Vessel, we come to our final movement upgrade in the game, Monarch Wings, which allows us to double jump. As of right now, save for exactly 2 areas which require an upgrade to one of our abilities, we can go anywhere in the game. On our way out, however, we find the Broken Vessel's corpse still there, unlike every other enemy that has simply exploded. It also has the same particles floating from it as essence. If we dream nail the corpse, we're brought to another dream, where we can enter another arena and come face to face with another boss, Lost Kin. While it may seem odd to introduce dream bosses so quickly after defeating the first version of it, I consider it a fantastic way to do so, simply because there's no room for error. As far as I'm aware, you're required to have the dream nail by this point, so you'll always run into this. And then you'll think, I wonder if any other bosses have this as well. Or perhaps you'll be hoping that they don't, because Lost Kin is the hardest boss that we've faced so far, and by a very wide margin. That's right, Broken Vessel was just the training wheels. The key here is patience. You will not have the damage output to match Lost Kin in terms of aggression, so focus on survivability and getting down your reactions, which will take time. Don't worry, it's a hard boss. You're gonna die several times trying to get it down, but by the end, you'll end up a much better player than before. It's worth it, I promise. As we fight Lost Kin, I want to briefly mention Broken Vessel, and I mean briefly because there isn't much to it within the lore. This is now the second time we've run into another of the knight's kind, with the corpse that gave us the Mothwing cloak, and now this. While we don't know what the knight is yet, I think it's important to have these two encounters before we learn so that it doesn't come as a shock when the big twist is revealed about the knight's origins. For defeating Lost Kin, you get yourself a hefty 400 essence, which will be useful later. Aside from a short platforming challenge to get a grub, we're done here. Returning to the main room of Ancient Basin and moving to the right, we'll find a large room with a corpse and some unknown structure behind it. Using your dream nail on this corpse yields very little reaction, but the seer did say that it was dulled over time, so we'll have to come back later to do anything with that. Breaking through a wall to the right, we'll find yet another stag station, ending our visit to the Ancient Basin. As of right now, we have entered the late game. Now that we have every movement ability, the world is quite literally our burrito, and we can unwrap it any which way we choose. However, when we got the dream nail, we finally got a concrete goal. Wake the dreamers and break their seal, so we're going to focus on that before we do any superfluous exploration. However, given the power they've shown, even if it has diminished over time, we can probably buff ourselves up just a bit more. So for that, unfortunately, we need to head back into Crystal Peak. As we head there through Forgotten Crossroads again, we find that there's been a massive shift. The infection has spread far and wide, yes, but it seems to have become more concentrated in the Crossroads because of its close proximity to the Black Egg Temple. From here on, we'll need to be really careful through this area, as there's a ton of projectiles and explosions to watch out for now. Getting into Peaks is still pretty simple, as we can head through that dark room we found at Crossroads at the beginning. Our first stop is right at the very tippy top of Peaks, where there's a platform that we needed wings to get to. Following the path will eventually lead us to Horniest's crown, the very top of the world, and where we can find our first pale ore. From there, our second order of business is to finish off the Crystal Guardian. In the room where we fought it, there's a platform we needed wings to get to, and when we follow the path, we come to a powered up form of the boss, Enraged Guardian. He's still a joke, just a bit faster. Just keep attacking and you'll be fine. For defeating him, you get another mask shard, starting our second set of 4. Finally, we can head back to the room we found Cornifer in and head left to open up a shortcut back to Dirtmouth, so we can use that to get back to Peaks instead of going through infected Crossroads again. And with that, we're completely done with Crystal Peak, save for a short visit that we'll have later for DLC purposes and cleanup. Now that we have a piece of pale ore, let's go back to the nailsmith to get our next nail upgrade. You can go to either the city storerooms and head down if you want to stop by Lem to sell your relics, or King's Station and head left if you're in a hurry. Either way, this will be a great help for the bosses ahead. Though we know a dreamer is located somewhere in the city, I'm more interested in taking a detour back through the Soul Sanctum. While there aren't any hints as to which bosses will have dream variants, I'll go ahead and tell you that there are 3. Broken Vessel, Soul Master, and False Knight, with more added via DLC that we'll discuss as we get to them. The Soul Tyrant variant of this fight isn't any mechanically different than the Soul Master fight, it's just faster. I would actually consider Soul Tyrant to be the easiest of the 3 base game dream bosses, so while I enjoy it immensely, I won't go into much detail on it, as I would just be retreading the same ground again. For defeating him, you get 300 essence. Unlike Broken Vessel, who, like the Knight, is silent, Soul Master's spirit gives us a bit more insight into why he committed the heinous actions that he did before disappearing forever. From here, we're gonna head back to King's Station and get to that dreamer in the city, and... what's this? What am I doing? Oh, I have enough geo for the fountain. Yes, despite the text, you only need to drop 3,000 geo, which is a lot, but with all the relics we've collected, I have more than enough. In any case, now we head back to King's Station, go up this elevator, and use our double jump, or we can pogo, I guess, and from here it will be more or less a straight shot to the boss. It's the same thing that we saw with the Soul Sanctum, a bunch of rooms with levers that are blocked by enemies, only these enemies are my least favorite, so yeah. The boss guarding this dreamer are the Watcher Knights, and they're considered by many to be the hardest boss relative to where you are in the game, and I would be inclined to agree if the dream bosses didn't exist. As you can tell from my first attempt, it's very easy to become overwhelmed after you defeat the first one and 2 more spawn in. However, by the same token, you can easily begin overwhelming them with good enough play, to the point where, once you get the patterns down, I actually consider them to be some of the easier bosses to fight. As you can see, you can kill 2 at once and get a soft reset to the fight if you spread your damage out well enough. As well, if you go up to this hidden area, you can break a chandelier to cut down the number of knights needed to be killed by 1, resulting in a much easier experience. With these guards defeated, nothing stands between you and the first dreamer, Lurien the Watcher. The dreamers all share the tragic aspect that defines the 5 great knights. However, the flavor is significantly different with each pasta, given that the dreamers all retain their autonomy and were always in control of their own fate, a luxury that the 5 great knights were not granted. So whereas the knights' ends are tragic from forces beyond their control, the dreamers' tragedy was supremely honorable. Each willingly gave their life to protect Hallownest, even if their efforts ultimately were for naught. Lurien is perhaps the simplest of the dreamers, having been loyal to the Pale King and offered his body for use as a seal to the Black Egg Temple. With 1 dreamer down and the next 2 very far off, I decided to do a bit of cleanup on our way to our destination. First things first, we can find our 3rd dream boss in the room where we fought the False Knight. There's a breakable wall that leads to its dream variant, Failed Champion. This is what I would consider to be the hardest fight in the game aside from the final bosses, and it's a combination of his speed and damage output. Failed Champion is fast, that's undeniable. This would be fine, but he also deals 2 masks of damage per hit. Given Hollow Knight's damage effect and how obtrusive it can be, getting hit more often than not leads into a nasty chain reaction where you just can't get away. However, Failed Champion does have a pattern that you can learn. Basically, when he jumps toward you, dash under him, and when he jumps away from you, dash away from him. Jumping forwards means he's going to slam down in a jump attack, while jumping away means that he's going to send out shockwaves. Eventually, your reactions will become fast enough to outlast him. For defeating Failed Champion, you learn not much else about the maggot's motivation, but you get another 300 essence. Next, as we start to head down toward our next destination, we can make a few stops in Fungal Wastes. First, across from the room where we first met Cloth, we can find another warrior dream like we had Zero. This is Elder Hu, an annoying asshole that continually disappears and makes pancakes rain down on you. He was once a sage that helped people that became infected, not realizing that he became infected as well. He saw the Mantis tribe as being afflicted and battled them to his eventual death. Not much else to say, really. If we head down to the room above where we got the Mantis Claw and head left, we'll find ourselves on a downward path that ends in a masked shard. I also bought another one of them and a vessel fragment from Sly before going on this trek. If we head to the right from here, we'll find ourselves back in the Mantis Lord's room. That's right, I lied to you earlier. We did go through this transition, just not at the time. If we continue to the left of here, we'll find ourselves in our next area, and one that we've heard quite a bit about already, Deepnest. This is a very hostile area, full of traps and writhing bugs as damage zones, similar to the ancient Basin. Very quickly it becomes apparent that this is where only the most hardened of bugs live, along with the spider tribe, but going through it is actually fairly simple in theory. Basically, we have a small section at the beginning, a few detours right after that, and then we can start our horseshoe before beelining to the left until we reach the end. Entering from the Mantis village, we have to go right and then down at the first available opportunity. That will lead us to a long shaft that ends in a hot spring, and this is going to be our true starting point of exploration. Heading left and then up, we'll find ourselves in the first real pogo challenge since we were taught the lesson all the way back in Forgotten Crossroads, and at the end, we get ourselves another vessel fragment, completing our second. Heading across the hot springs to the left, there will be a breakable wall that leads to a grub, but then there's another breakable wall that leads to, unfortunately, the only boss that Deepnest has to offer, Nosk.
Handy,
While the atmosphere leading up to this fight is excellent, the fight itself is absolute trash, and is easily the worst boss we've seen thus far. Sure, Crystal Guardian wasn't great, but it was very fast, and you had complete control over the fight. With Nosk, you generally have to wait for it to run at you. You hit it once or twice, shoot a fireball when you can, and beyond that, just hope for the best. Its hitbox is probably the worst one in the game as well, resulting in hits that don't feel like they're your fault. And really, the worst part is that the reward you get for killing Nosk is absolutely excellent, another Pale Ore, so you'll want to fight it every time you come to Deepnest for the first time, which makes the fight even more painful to me. Lore-wise, there's nothing to say. It copies the appearance of bugs and then eats them. It also has some sort of connection to the infection from its bulbous center, but we don't know what, and I don't really want to know, so we're moving on. With those distractions out of the way, we can begin our horseshoe in earnest. If we head to the left of the hot springs and head up, we'll eventually run into... Oh my god. Could it be? That valiant, handsome voice beckons me back around, and after a short gauntlet, we can free Zote the Mighty from the clutches of these dastardly bugs that webbed him up. I mean, he obviously wasn't in any real danger. I can only surmise his profound intentions, but if my lowly mind were to guess, I would say he was giving those that captured him a false sense of security before striking with absolute precision and righteousness. He not only threatens us, as is his right to do with his mighty nail Life Ender, but also absolutely destroys us by saying that we're lost in the dark. How in the world is he so perceptive? He must have some kind of divine prescience that allows him to see past the borders of the screen. Is he watching me? Watching me play, watching me fail, and silently judging me for that? Well, I won't let down Zote the Mighty, or my name isn't the Knight. I mean, it isn't, but let's keep going anyway. Heading up from there, we meet the comparatively more timid Cloth for the second time. She also has a surprising amount of knowledge, correctly identifying the tougher-than-average nature of the bugs in Deepnest. We're going to let her rest for a moment and be on our way. I'm sure we'll run into her again, and I definitely won't be a dumbass that forgot to find her before she became important. Surely that won't happen. Surely. Going to the left, we're skipping the downward exit and continuing in that same direction. This will eventually lead us to the tram pass, which will finally allow us to use the remaining tram stations that we've seen throughout our adventure thus far. From there, going down and then to the left at the earliest available opportunity leads us to Galeon, our next warrior dream. His fight is similar to the other dream bosses, and now that we've seen 3 of them, I think it's safe to explain a few commonalities between all 7 that we'll eventually face. In essence, their fights are designed around projectiles. However, unlike those of regular enemies that simply spit them in an arc, or Soulmaster, who shoots them from random places, the warrior dreams clearly produce them from themselves, and when they don't, they're physical weapons that they're somehow channeling telekinetically. Basically, they're projectiles that move with more purpose than you'd see elsewhere, and Galeon is no different. He also shares traits with the other warrior dreams that I'll go into when we find a few more. He was a knight that wanted to prove his mettle to the Pale King, and so ventured into Deepnest to battle the bugs there, only to perish at their hands without recognition. Moving down and then continually to the right, we'll start to find a lot more overtly spider-like enemies. There's a structure here that leads into the Weaver Song charm that summons small weaverlings to aid you in combat, adding to the association. The Spider Tribe, like the Mantis Tribe, rejected the rule of the Pale King, though they were much more overtly hostile about it, violently tearing down the half-built tramway in the upper part of their land, for an example. Tensions became so heated that a truce was made between the Pale King and the Mantis Tribe that hated him to, among other things, keep the hostile bugs of Deepnest at bay. It's unclear if, in the wake of the Pale King's power, the Spider Tribe really had any chance of threatening Hallownest, but what is known is that one of the Dreamers, Hera the Beast, was the matriarch of the Spider Tribe. Not much is known about the history of the Spider Tribe before Hera, though it is known that she had a mate once, but he died before they could birth an heir. My personal theory is that he was slain during the conflict between the Pale King and the Spider Tribe. In any case, to ensure the safety of the vessel, as it was put in the Resting Grounds Memorial, the Pale King struck a bargain with Hera. He would sire an heir for her, and she would become a dreamer. Who was this heir? Was it us? Well, we'll get to it later. For now, we've reached the distant village. This place was obviously a home of the Spider Tribe, but this place really confuses me. Inside of the main nest, you'll find these bugs that trap you when you sit on the bench in the center of the room, but who are these bugs? They don't seem to be infected because they can talk to you, but they don't look like spiders, and there's no lore surrounding them. After they capture you, they're absolutely nowhere to be seen either. Honestly, I'm stumped. If any of you have any answers, please let me know. In any case, we can navigate this maze, deal with a really annoying enemy that can deal 2 masks of damage, and then find Hera. After dream nailing her, we enter the dream, beat her up, and break her portion of the seal at Black Egg Temple. 2 dreamers down, 1 to go. So this next short part is mostly due to my own forgetfulness when it comes to what needs to be done and when here in the late game, but we still do and see a few interesting things, or, well, one thing, in my futile quest to prove that I'm not an idiot. From the Greenpath stag station, we need to head down to the room with the spiky vines, and then head right until we can head down again. This is a path we never took on our first run through of this area, and it's where we can find the massive moss charger that I mentioned in that section. However, more importantly, there's a path to the right that leads to a temple called the Stone Sanctuary that holds our next warrior dream, No Eyes. While there's a nice dark element to her lore, of her ripping her eyes out to keep herself from seeing the dangerous light that Milo was talking about, I think what's more cool and disturbing was the original intention for her death. When the infection hit, she was out to battle. When she returned, her children, having gone insane, attacked her. Because she couldn't bear to fight against them, she instead tore her eyes out so that she didn't have to watch them suffer in insanity before they ultimately killed her. Wow, that is super dark, and while I understand why Team Cherry toned it down, man would it have been cool. As it is, No Eyes is an okay fight, once again with projectiles that move in purposeful patterns. This version of the fight is pretty easy, but there will be a version later on in the DLC that's an absolute nightmare if you are not comfortable with the movement of the game. For defeating her, you get Essence and a Mask Shard, getting us a 7th mask. And before I forget, if we move to the left past Mossy Boy, there's a room where you can find a Vessel Fragment as well. In the room between No Eyes and Mossy, you can head down to the next area, Fog Canyon. This is a strange zone, mostly characterized by a bunch of acid and a bunch of jellyfish. There are no traditional enemies, just what are essentially stage hazards, which, while unique, don't exactly inspire a ton of memorability simply because it's too easy to play around it. I remember Fog Canyon for 2 reasons. First, for being stuck here for hours trying to get to where I need to go on my first playthrough, and for the sound mix. In this area, all of the sound effects are dampened to add to the ethereal, buoyant quality to a lot of Fog Canyon. It's a really nice touch, and is very appreciated. This is also one of the few areas where we won't be making a horseshoe either, mostly because we can't. There is an opportunity to have one, but it's being blocked at the moment by this shadowy gate. For now, all we can really do is head down through this connective pathway, which leads us to 2 landmarks. The first of these is Millabelle, a banker. I'm going to invest here myself because, spoilers, there's a hidden interest mechanic that I'm going to take advantage of for later purchasing. So let's get that rolling now, shall we? Next is the Queen Station, the feminine counterpart to the Stag Station on the east side of City of Tears. However, I consider this one to be better for 2 reasons. First, it has a mask shard, and second, we can find Willow here, who is just adorable. Anyway, I tried for a solid like 15 minutes trying to get to the correct path in Fog Canyon to get to our final dreamer, but nothing worked. First, that door I emphasized for you not to forget in Fungal Waste fucked me over and made me go around, and then when I finally got around to another potential entrance into Fog Canyon, I was blocked by this stupid little pool of acid that I, of course, couldn't cross, so I did the classic quit out method to quickly get back to the Queen Station stag to figure something else out, only to spawn back in Greenpath because I had the bright idea of not using the bench in that stupid stag station. In short, we need to take a detour, and it's one that I do not look forward to. Going back to that keyhole in the City of Tears, we can use one of our simple keys to open the way to the Royal Waterways. This is easily my least favorite area in the game. While some areas can ride the line between being cool and disgusting, Waterways is just disgusting. I hate every enemy here, all of the rooms feel incredibly dark even though you don't need the Lumafly lantern to get through it, and I never have a good time here. Alas, if we head down and to the right, we'll find our hub bench, which is where we'll be spreading out from. First, heading back up that shaft and to the left gets us to Cornifer and a Mask Shard, which is easily the best reward we get from this place. But while other shards require a platforming challenge or a boss, this one is just kind of sitting here. Strange. Anyway, back at the bench, we're going to head straight down and eventually come across this path with... tentacles. Heading to the left through this hidden pathway leads us to the Flukemar mini-boss, which is a simple DPS check. If you can kill the little buggers it spawns in one hit, you win. If not, you'll probably lose. It's a punching bag otherwise, moving on, even though I'm extremely horny for it. Going back to the bench once again, we're heading straight to the right and finding the one good part of the Waterways. Its boss, Dung Defender. I don't really have much to say on the fight itself. You can tell what he's about by the footage, and his attacks are all fairly basic, but I will mention 3 things about him. First, though I don't show it here, this fight can be easily cheesed with our dive ability, as it can force him to stagger out of the ground when he digs beneath it. Second, the music for this fight, while it isn't my favorite, is a favorite of many people, so I guess have fun with that. Third, as we head down from here and toward the path that his switch was blocking off from us, we're going to return again to the 5 Great Knights of Hallownest. We've spoken about Zemmer and Hegemal, now we get to talk about Ogrim and Isma, because Dung Defender is Ogrim. Though direct comparison between the abilities of the 5 is impossible, it's implied that Ogrim was weaker than at least Isma. We don't know what drove him to guard Isma's Grove, our next destination, but we do know that he's been doing it for a long time. The way he speaks implies that either he doesn't know, or what I think is more likely, won't allow himself to believe that Hallownest is truly lost. If we come back later, he also doesn't seem to be aware of Isma's passing, meaning he's guarding her grove for nothing. Meanwhile, Isma is an enigma. We know that she is likely stronger than Ogrim, and that she was kind and understanding, but what she did, what she could do, how she died, or anything else concrete about her is a mystery. All we know is that the artifact her corpse grants, Isma's Tear, grants an immunity to acid, but we can only draw so much from that. My personal theory is that she died to stop the flow of acid to the rest of Hallownest, as after the kingdom fell, there would have been no workers to regulate its use or distribution throughout the Waterways, leaving only her, though she obviously wouldn't have been entirely successful. In any case, Isma's Tear, though required under normal circumstances, is easily the most boring upgrade we get in the entire game, just allowing the knight to swim in acid without issue. It's dull, and it perfectly exemplifies my feelings toward the Royal Waterways in general. Going up from the Grove, we'll find an exit to a house in the City of Tears which holds a... friendly bug? Well, she's hot, so who cares? Emilicia here serves a thin purpose, but a purpose nonetheless, to provide doubt about the citizens of Hallownest. If the elite of the city were like her, who's to say the kingdom even deserved to survive, you know? Did the Pale King really guide his citizenry to such levels of pomp and egotism? Who knows? Maybe she's an outlier. Now that we have Isma's Tear, we can finally explore Fog Canyon to the fullest extent. However, you might be disappointed that there's not really much here for us to do. First things first, if we head up the initial room and head left, we can cross the acid to a new area entirely, Queen's Garden, though we'll have to come back later for the sake of not getting sidetracked. Heading up at the earliest opportunity, we can make it to the Overgrown Mound, the site of our last magic spell, Howling Wraiths. Back at Queen's Station, we're going to head up through fungal wastes until we get to that small acid pool across from Leg Eater. Entering Fog Canyon from this direction will allow us to access everything we need. Heading to the left, we'll find ourselves in an extremely dangerous room that contains a charm notch, making this stupid death very worth. Moving down from here and heading left already brings us to our final destination, the Teacher's Archives. Outside of it, we run into Quirrell again. However, unlike every other time in which he stated a vague sense of mystery about Hallownest, this time he specifically says that this building is calling to him, and that he senses familiarity to it. Inside, we can eventually reach the boss of the area, Uwu. Sadly, despite this place being an opportunity to tell a wonderfully dark story a la the Soul Sanctum, there's next to nothing to learn about this creature or the exploding jellyfish in the Fog Canyon around it. It simply guards our last dreamer and is invincible. However, with the help of Quirrell, though I have no idea what makes his nail better than ours, we're able to defeat Uwu and gain access to Manamon the Teacher. It's revealed that Quirrell used to be Manamon's assistant, and she called him here to release the seal on her so that the knight could break the seal she had on the Black Egg Temple. Before I go into Monomon and the lore of Hallownest, I just want to make note of what happens to Quirrell after this. Earlier in the game, when we speak to him in the City of Tears, he wonders where the rain comes from. To the left of the resting grounds lies the Blue Lake, the source of the rain, and where we find Quirrell for the final time. Quirrell really is a fantastic character. He isn't deep or profound, but his love of adventure and his appreciation for beautiful and intriguing sights is so endearing. His constant concern for the night and his advice for succeeding in our quest swayed me to his side immediately, and to hear him say that the most intriguing thing he found in his own journey was us is just the icing on the cake. However, all good friendships must eventually end, and after we sit here with him in the serenity of the Blue Lake, the next time we come here, Quirrell is gone, and his nail is left behind, never to be seen again. Though we don't know much about Monomon, we know that she wrote the elegy for Hallownest, the text we read at the beginning of the game. In wilds beyond they speak your name with reverence and regret. For none could tame our savage souls, yet you the challenge met. Under palest watch you taught, we changed, base instincts were redeemed. A world you gave to bug and beast, as they had never dreamed. Now that we have a more worldly outlook on Hallownest, we can start to piece together the meaning behind this excerpt. We now know that it refers to the Pale King, who entered Hallownest as an outsider and came to rule the majority of its territory. While some rejected his authority, most readily accepted it for protection or, as the excerpt states, knowledge. It's unclear to what extent the Pale King had to teach the people of Hallownest, but if we take this excerpt at face value, it must have been quite a bit. It's possible, even, that the bugs of Hallownest were nothing but mindless husks, not unlike how they are now that they've been infected. However, somewhere along the way, something went wrong. The infection appeared and began to spread throughout the kingdom, and despite the best efforts of everyone involved, it overtook and destroyed Hallownest, save for very small pockets of civilized bugs, such as those from Dirtmouth and the Mantis tribe. Eventually, the Pale King used one of the Knight's species, a pure vessel, to contain the infection, which became the Hollow Knight. To further ensure this operation's success, the Pale King convinced three prominent figures, Monomon the Teacher, Lurien the Watcher, and Hera the Beast, into entering eternal sleep to act as seals to the Black Egg Temple where the Hollow Knight was being held. Now that the seals are broken, however, the temple is open to us. As far as we know, if the opening cutscene is implying as such, the Hollow Knight called out to the Knight from its prison when its mask cracked and released the infection once again. It called out to the Knight so that we could stop it, and that's exactly what we're going to do. However, first we do have a small bit of cleanup to take care of. Since we're right here, I'm going to once again deposit my Geo to Millabel for the investment. Next, we'll head back to Dirtmouth for the final time to see if anything has changed. Once we have all three Dreamers taken care of, we'll be able to find Cornifer retired in his house at long last. As well, we'll find Bretta's house open, where we can get a mask shard and read her diary. And hey, since we only have one more to go before our next mask upgrade, I figured we could just buy one from Sly, so let's head back to Millabel to... What? But my investment. Well, thankfully, I know where she is. We just need a simple key to get in, and god damn it! And the only other simple key we know about, Sly has, and we can't get it because we can't afford it, and we can't afford it because Millabel has all of our Geo! Fuck! Well played, you absolute bitch basket. Well played. Fine, then in that case, we're already done with preparation. The Black Egg Temple is open, and the Hollow Knight awaits. Inside, if we examine the lore tablet, we'll get the World Sense, which lets us see our completion percentage in the menu. But if we continue to the right and break all of the chains, we'll free the Hollow Knight, and the final battle will begin. Hollow Knight is a tough opponent, fast and with a wide variety of attacks. However, as the battle continues, it's obvious that it doesn't actually want to fight us, and in fact stabs itself when it gains control for a brief time to try and help us. However, it ultimately can't overcome the source of the infection, and we have to defeat our brethren. After defeating the Hollow Knight, we have to absorb the infection into ourselves, and with that, we will hopefully stave off the infection for another to ultimately end it. Sadly, we didn't find its true source, nor did we have the necessary tools to purge the infection completely. In the end, our efforts amounted to no more than the Pale King and the Dreamers. We bought Hallownest some time, but maybe that's enough for now. Here we are, 42.5 pages and 18,363 words in, and we've finished Hollow Knight. Only, that isn't true. After the credits, we're given a summary of our playthrough, and as you can see, we are only 62% done. That's right, believe it or not, we still have a whole 5 areas to explore, 5 upgrades to get, several character storylines to finish, and a ton of optional and DLC related content to complete. So, once we get back to the title screen, let's jump right back in. Our first stop is the fittingly titled area of Kingdom's Edge, which we can access from the western, wealthy half of the City of Tears, where we can also begin our journey through the DLC if we so choose. If we head back to the Dung Defender's arena through the broken elevator shaft to Ancient Basin, we can find a hidden room where he's sleeping. As part of the Hidden Dreams DLC, an extra dream battle was added to face Dung Defender in his prime as White Defender. There's not much to say about this fight other than that he's easily in the top 5 hardest fights we've had thus far, and you can't cheese him like you can the Dung Defender. And also that I'm really bad at it. As you'll see, I had to cheese his second phase in another way to actually beat him, and even then only barely. What can I say? I'm so used to fighting this guy with tools that we don't have yet that fighting him without is really, really painful. One interesting thing to note is that we can fight him again if we so choose, which is the first of 2 instances of this. If we fight him enough, Dung Defender will eventually wake up and speak to us, but I didn't feel the need to go that far when the internet exists, and I would just be doing the same fight over and over again. So yeah, I didn't do that. If we head to King Station and head down and to the right, we'll find a hidden path through the water which leads to the Kingdom's Edge area, where first we have to drop down to the bottom of the area, then go right and then head up. To the right of that initial room where we drop down, we come to a room where we can easily grind for Geo if we so choose, before we head further to the right, encountering what many believe to be the most annoying enemies in the game, Primal Aspids, and yes, they're annoying. However, if we keep going to the right, we'll find this hut which contains a friendly bug named Oro, a nail master, and surprisingly, this is the first that we've encountered. In prior playthroughs, I usually had at least 2 nail arts before I was able to finish the game, but not so with the route I've chosen for this playthrough. In any case, though he's willing to teach us the nail art he's mastered, he demands, fee.
I'm gonna do what's called a poking.
God!
Oh, Bakura, she nailed him!
Oh my dude, you just got it!
God damn it, Millabelle. Anyway, Oro teaches us the dash slash, the first of 3 nail arts that we can learn. We'll speak about Oro later when we find some more nail masters. For now, if we head to the right of his hut, we'll find a secret path that leads to another charm, Quick Slash. Without a doubt, Quick Slash is the best charm in the game. It facilitates both a nail build and a spell build at once, because it basically doubles your nail damage with the speed you can attack, and doubles your soul generation for the same reason. It's such a simple charm, but it's going to be absolutely invaluable for the rest of our adventure, and I will never unequip it from here. If we head up, we'll find ourselves blocked to the right, so we just have to head up again. When we can, we're going to head to the right toward our main goal for this area. Going this way, we finally run into Hornet again. Following her to an arena, she challenges us to another duel, this time not holding back. As with White Defender, there isn't much of a mechanical difference between this fight and the one we had with her all the way back in Greenpath at the beginning of the game. And yet it's so much harder only because of her increased speed and aggression. It's a fantastic fight and remains one of my favorites in the base game. Heading past her, we'll end up in the cast-off shell, which contains the King's Brand. Though Hornet saves us from the collapsing cavern and we then go on our way, we don't really know the significance of this quite yet. We find it out quickly, however, as if we head all the way up from the main path, we'll find a friendly bug named Bardoon, who explains that the ash that falls in Kingdom's Edge is molt from the corpse of a long-dead worm which left behind the cast-off shell we were just in. Though it was only technically confirmed by a tie-in novel called, funnily enough, The Wanderer's Journal, context clues indicate that this worm was, in fact, the Pale King, given that the King's Brand was located within his old shell. I don't believe this has any profound meaning, unless we're stretching this into biblical allegory of the divine Pale King casting off his divinity to live among man, or in this case, bug. Really, it's just a great bit of world building, and makes for a wonderful atmosphere through the exploration of this area. As we continue further upwards, corpses will start to fall down around us, and if we travel further, we'll eventually find the source of them, the Colosseum of Fools. There are 3 gauntlets, or trials, that we can undertake for various rewards, and in the underbelly of the Colosseum we'll find him. Just like his godliness is wont to do, he's luring the fiends that run this cursed place into another trap, just like he was doing in Deepnest. Well, this time we will not be interrupting him, so instead let's begin our first trial, the Trial of the Warrior. It's a standard enemy gauntlet, made up of fairly easy waves of mobs. Quick Slash makes mincemeat of every foe, and our upgraded Nail doesn't have much trouble cutting through their defenses. At the end, we have to fight 2 Gruzmothers simultaneously, but they're fairly easy. With that, we just have one more opponent. Oh my god, what could it be? A fearsome beast? Perhaps the 5th Great Knight of Hallownest? Cornifer? Is it? Could it be? Oh my god. This is impossible. How are we supposed to stand up to perfection? This has got to be one of those fights that you die to now and come back later after you've powered up, but this is Zote the Mighty here. A god among bugs, stronger than even the Pale King, wielding Life Ender, the greatest weapon of all time. Well, in any case, this is going to be one hell of a fight. But if his grace would allow me to, I would be honored to give him the lightest of workouts as he trounces. Growing up means watching my heroes turn human in front of me. And the songs we wrote at 18 seem short-sighted and naive. So when the weather breaks, I'll put my hoodie up over my face. I won't run away. 'Cause as fucked as this place got, it made me. The Trial of the Conqueror is probably the easiest of the trials. Though that might just be because I've done it so much to grind for Geo in the past. So instead of focusing on that, let's talk about Hornet, because we know enough now to discuss her. That's much better. Hornet is the hottest bug in Hallownest. I would rate her a 9 on the sexy scale, with particular highlight going to her voice and those horns that I'm sure can be used for something pleasurable. She's also one of the more interesting characters we come across, owing mostly to the amount of screen time she has compared to the other NPCs like Bretta or the Nailsmith. All the text tells us explicitly up to this point is that she's a mysterious self-proclaimed protector of Hallownest that has tried to stop the Knight twice from doing whatever it is she thought we were doing. What that is still yet to be revealed, but if we piece together some information that we've gained and will gain soon, we'll be able to figure out a bit more about her and why she's so invested in Hallownest and its preservation. In the beginning of our journey, Hornet saw the Knight as no better than the other vessels that have failed in whatever task we're set to do, such as the one at the background of our initial fight with her. It's unclear what she thought the Knight's intention was, but when she spoke at the Hollow Knight Memorial, she seemed to have realized that the Knight was a bit different than the other vessels. She urged us to pursue knowledge about the fate of Hallownest, so that we may gain the strength and perspective necessary to alter it. Now, in Kingdom's Edge, she faces us in one final test, where she acknowledges the Knight's strength and allows them to obtain the King's brand. But why? Why does Hornet care so much about Hallownest? Did she have some connection to it before the infection took hold? Well, yes. Do you remember back in Deepnest when we were discussing Hera? She had a child with the Pale King in exchange for becoming a dreamer. That child is Hornet. Unfortunately, I didn't get the footage for this, but if you get the King's brand before breaking Hera's seal, Hornet will be there when the Knight wakes up, and she asks for a moment to herself to say goodbye to her mother. This is why she was so hell-bent on stopping the Knight. She knew that it would kill her mother, and the only reason she allowed us to do so was because she saw the possibility of freeing Hallownest from its hellish perpetuity caused by the infection. Hornet is a character that knows that sacrifices must be made for the greater good, and she's a very well-written version of this archetype. I enjoy Hornet immensely, both as a fight and as a character, and I can't wait to see what's in store for her in Silksong. In other news, Oblobbles. There's no lore surrounding them, and they're just fake bullet hell in a game that's not designed for it. I don't like them. For both the Trial of the Warrior and Trial of the Conqueror, you get a Charm Notch and another piece of Pale Ore. The final gauntlet, the Trial of the Fool, is exceptionally difficult in my opinion, so we're going to hold off on it until we get more power. If we head around to the right side of the arena, there's a breakable wall with an encounter with a pale lurker, the only one in the game. It's an annoying encounter, but we can use our newly acquired dash slash to deal with it just the same. It drops a simple key, and hey, you know what that means? Let's head back to the City of Tears and open up that lock. We can enter to see that someone named Marissa is singing, who turns out to be a spirit of a dead songstress. She's the source of the singing that we hear in the background music of the game, which is a really nice touch. However, what we're really here for lies above in the hot spring. Millabelle can try to make excuses, but as it's said under her name, she's a thief. So, like Moneybags in Spyro, we get to beat out all of the geo we gave her and more. Hence why I said there was interest involved with the system. Now that we have a ton of geo, and more with all of the relics we're giving to Lem, we'll have plenty to start buying out all of the shops around Howling. This isn't strictly necessary for completion, but it made me feel good. As well, with the pale ore we have, we can upgrade our nail again, for the second to last time. Honestly, we don't really need the last nail upgrade, our damage output is already insane, but we'll get it nonetheless, if nothing else for the DLC. Back at Dirtmouth, we find that... he has come by, boasting like the liar he is about his false exploits, and Bretta's eating it right up. Fucking idiot. Who would be dumb enough to believe those obviously tall tales? Maybe we should have left her in fungal waste to be infected. It would have been a nicer fate than this. Anyway, the only shop that we can't buy out at this point is Salubra, who starts selling Salubra's blessing upon buying out her normal stock, which is a mark of charm completion and nothing more, so we'll be coming back after we get all of them. But with that, I mentioned getting more strength for the Trial of the Fool. Well, I also mentioned other nail masters besides Oro, so why don't we go seek them out? The first up is going to be back where it all began. All the way back at the beginning of King's Pass, we can find a route that needed the Mantis Claw, and if we follow it, we'll come to our next area. Howling Cliffs isn't the most dense area when it comes to points of interest. Really, it has 3, or 2 without DLC. The first of which is our next warrior dream, Gorb. Unlike the other warrior dreams, Gorb is a mystery, having no discernible connection to Hallownest whatsoever, with all that we know being that it wanted bugs to worship its supposedly all-knowing mind, and it wanted to ascend in some way. However, though it doesn't seem to have any connection to Hallownest, it does have a spiritual connection to the other warrior dreams. Have you noticed a constant throughout their tales? I did. Arrogance, or more accurately, delusion. Each of them have fooled themselves into thinking they're greater or more capable than they actually are, and each has been summarily struck down for their hubris. Zero turned against the freaking Pale King, believing he could cut through that plague in his dreams. Elder Hu thought he could cleanse Hallownest of the infection with his pancakes, and was killed by the Mantis tribe after he attacked them thanks to his own infection. Galen, most obviously, deluded himself into thinking he was strong enough to take on the bugs of Deepnest, only to be killed in battle. No Eyes thought she could circumvent the infection by refusing to look at the light in her dreams, and now, here with Gorb, it believes that its mind is all-knowing, when if it was, it probably wouldn't have died here on this forgotten cliffside, far outside the kingdom of Hallownest proper. To me, it looked like they were either unaware of Gorb, or that they wanted to get rid of him. In any case, we can drop down from Gorb's altar and enter this hut to find the Nailmaster Motto, who, unlike his brother Oro, doesn't charge us anything to learn his nail art, the Cyclone Slash. Motto here comes onto the night a bit thick for my tastes, so we're just gonna move on. If we head to the right and head down along the cliffside, we'll eventually find a chamber that imparts the Joni's blessing charm, found on the corpse of a bug presumably named Joni. We don't know anything about Joni. Like, at all. We know that she has some connection to Lifeblood, given the charms associated with her, but that's about it. Given that she's dead, and Lifeblood can be seen as something of a substitute for soul, I propose 2 theories. First, she was executed by the Pale King or one of his followers. Given that she's known as the Kindly Heretic, according to her blessing, it's safe to assume that she wasn't the most popular bug in Hallownest, perhaps due to some connection or experimentation with Lifeblood. Maybe she was seen as trying to erase soul from existence, but that's purely conjecture. The second theory is that she perished similarly to Soulmaster, having been trying to use Lifeblood to stop the infection, as opposed to the Soulmaster's soul attempts. Obviously, this didn't work. If we head further down still, we'll find a breakable wall that leads us to a strange bug. Given that the Dreamer's descriptions match this mysterious bug, it's safe to assume that we need to dream nail it. When we do, strange red essence glyphs burst out from it, and a lamp comes out of nowhere in the room before it. If we light it by hitting it a bunch, we'll get a little jingle, signifying that something has happened. Huh, wonder what that was. Well, in any case, going down from this grub in the lower right leads us back to Greenpath, which is conveniently where we can find the last Nailmaster. Through this long room full of spikes, we can find Nailmaster Shio, who, despite having moved on from the ways of the nail, still opts to teach us the Great Slash, meaning we now have all of the nail arts. Shio, like Quirrell, holds himself as calm and worldly, commenting on Oro and Mado as an older brother would when hearing of the exploits of his siblings, which it turns out is exactly what he is. Now that we have all of the nail arts, we can return to Dirtmouth and find... Huh, I guess lighting that flame did stuff after all. Inside of this strange tent, a being called Troupe Master Grimm greets us, saying that we've summoned him as part of a contract. He gives us the Grimmchild charm and tells us to go gather flames, whatever that's supposed to mean. This is the start of the Grimm Troupe DLC, which we'll be tackling just after we finish the Nailmasters. To do so, we're gonna have to head back to Sly. After we've mastered all 3 nail arts, we can find him in his basement, where he reveals that he's the nail sage that taught the 3 nail masters. In recognizing the knight's skill, he imparts the Nailmaster's Glory Charm, which I'll have on quite a bit because I like nail arts a lot. As you can see on the map, there are 3 flames for us to collect around Hallownest, which only appear with Grimmchild equipped. These are fights built around waiting for an attack and responding to it, and there will be 3 phases of these encounters, each with 3 fights. I won't be speaking on them because they're really just training for the main boss of the DLC, so instead we're going to talk about the Nailmasters in Sly. Little is known about who the Nailmaster brothers were before they were taken on as Sly's pupils, but it is known that they didn't leave on the best of terms. Specifically, Oro seems to have had a falling out with his brothers, though both still clearly care for him, as Shio speaks worriedly about him, and Mado comes to his aid in a later fight, if only in a dream that they share. We also don't really know what Sly thought of them, though one could interpret their current behavior as Sly never having thought they were particularly worthy. Both Mado and Shio are trying, in their own way, to hone their skills to eventually impress Sly, while Oro seems to be in a state of exile, where, from his attitude and the others' opinions about him, he either doesn't want Sly or his brother's approval, or something happened to make being with them too painful. Maybe it was a case of Oro and Sly being too similar, given their penchants for overpricing their goods. In any case, nowhere is Esme mentioned outside of when we initially meet Sly, but my personal theory is that she didn't die, but left, having been another pupil of Sly that Oro was particularly close to. When she left, he broke ties with the others in disgust for not stopping her or some such. Who knows, maybe we'll meet Esme in Silksong. Returning to Grimm after the first set of flames are collected doesn't yield much, just us being sent on our way once again. The second batch, against Grimmkin Masters this time, not novices, is a bit tougher, but it's the same deal really. Returning this time yields the first of 2 boss fights, against Troupe Master Grimm. Yes, there are only 2 boss fights as part of this DLC, and both are against the same character. However, one is a harder dream variant, so I'll discuss both when we get to the better fight. For now, I want to zero in on the Grimm Troupe itself, because they're almost as much of an anomaly as those bugs that trapped you when we took out Hera. As you progress through the quest, you learn more and more about the troupe and their purpose in the larger world of Hollow Knight. However, little is known about their origins, or rather, the origin of what spawned them, nor how it ties into the history of Hallownest. Despite having the outward appearance of a traveling circus, in reality, the Grimm Troupe are barely sentient avatars for a higher being known as the Nightmare's Heart, and the contract and ritual that you've agreed to by summoning them is done solely for the perpetuation of that entity, as it must be continually killed and reborn. To this end, Grimm gives the knight the Grimmchild, which he tasks with absorbing flames and growing stronger until it's powerful enough to sustain the Nightmare's Heart at the end of the quest. Yes, in the end, we don't necessarily win. After we defeat Grimm, he asks us to go gather 3 more flames, this time from Grimmkin Nightmares, which deal 2 masks of damage with every hit. Then, we come back, defeat Grimm's dream variant, Nightmare King Grimm or NKG, and the contract is fulfilled. The Grimmchild is now at its maximum power, and will one day perform this same ritual with another poor sap to fuel the Nightmare's Heart. Now, focusing on nightmares as a core theme of the DLC from a game largely about the power of dreams is a good choice, and overall I like this DLC, as it has one of my favorite fights in the game with NKG. However, I would have liked a lot more context into what we're doing and why, and especially had more of an idea of what the Nightmare's Heart even was or what it did. Now, we know about two higher beings already, uncreated Greenpath and its inhabitants from its dreams, and the Pale King heavily affected the entirety of Hallownest and brought sentience to all bugs. What has the Nightmare's Heart done? What does it do? I think it would be interesting to do the initial summoning ritual, and until the DLC is finished, certain NPCs and bosses that are highly affected by dreams or that have dream variants, such as the Warrior Dreams, Dung Defender, the Seer, Soulmaster, etc., would become inaccessible until the Grimm Troupe is dealt with. It would make sense that the normal dream progression is halted because of an invasive force for their dreams. At the very least, I would have liked a change in dialogue for these beings to reflect the influence of the Nightmare's Heart. But no, it's just here, I guess. In any case, earlier I mentioned that we don't necessarily win, but that's not entirely true. As with a couple of things in the base game, we have a choice at the end of this questline. One member of the troupe, Broom, leads us to the distant village, where Grimm and the Nightmare's Heart can't watch him as easily. He offers an alternative to completing the contract, ending the troupe permanently. He acknowledges and loathes that he's a simple slave to the Nightmare's Heart and wants it to end, though ultimately leaves the decision to the Knight, and even gives us the flame he was holding so that we can progress in that way as well. Should we go with Broom and break the contract, the Grimm Troupe will be banished and the Nightmare's Heart extinguished without being reborn. Instead of keeping the fully powered Grimchild charm, we would instead get the carefree melody from a character named Nim, who is presumably a version of Broom that's free from the Nightmare's Heart's control. However, if we do that, we miss out on potentially the best fight in the game, so we're gonna give Broom the good old deuces and piss off to get the other two final flames. I have exactly 3 issues with the fight against NKG. First, you must have Grimchild equipped, losing you out on 2 entire charm slots, which can potentially hamper you during the battle, especially because Grimchild doesn't even come with you to help in the nightmare. Second, the intro takes way too long for someone just learning the fight. It's certainly epic and badass, but there should have been a way to skip it in my opinion. Third, it uses the worst of the 2 Grimm fight themes. I much prefer the faster-paced, frantic theme that plays during your first encounter with him, but c'est la vie. However, other than that, I consider this fight to be completely perfect. His attacks are incredibly fast, but just slow enough to consistently react to. Our brains have been subconsciously training for this battle during the entirety of the DLC, what with the first fight with Grimm and the Grimmkin enemies we fought to collect the flames. Wait and react to his attacks, don't get greedy, and take the time to learn the fight. A good rule of thumb that I use to first learn this fight is to always jump when Grimm spawns in the air, because the 3 attacks he has there, a dive and slash, summoning fire pillars, and doing his desperation move, are all either slow or avoidable by jumping. Conversely, I tend to shade dash toward him to avoid damage, though I prefer to jump through his projectiles now that I'm more comfortable with the fight. Oh yeah, shade dash. Apologies that this was done slightly out of order, but I had to draw the line somewhere of fights to do without our final upgrade, and I chose to make that line at NKG. It would have been significantly harder to do without Shade Dash, so I got it before this fight. So just so we can get back on track, let's go over how I did that. To get the Shade Cloak upgrade, we'll need to use the King's brand that we got in Kingdom's Edge. Heading down to the bottom of the ancient basin, we can use it to open the door which led to the place the Pale King regretted. This is the Abyss, and it's the most straightforward area in the game by far, because it's mostly there for lore and story purposes, rather than to be a fully functioning part of Hallownest. Going all the way down to the bottom and heading to the left leads you to a room with a bunch of strange statues. I really dislike how obtuse this is, even with the similar looking statues around it, but what you have to do is use Howling Wraiths here, and that somehow upgrades it into the Abyss Shriek, our final spell upgrade. We'll discuss those soon enough. Going to the right, we'll find ourselves being attacked by entities that look disturbingly like the shade that we have to kill when we die. For now, we don't really know the full implications of what these things are, but we can climb these platforms and turn on the lighthouse to allow access across this lake of black liquid. Going further to the right leads us to this small fountain which grants the Shade Cloak. It's an invincible dash on a cooldown and is going to be immensely useful going forward. For example, it's how we get past those strange black void walls that we saw in Kingdom's Edge and Fog Canyon. This is all we have to do for now, but the Abyss is a very interesting area with heavy implications on the story. However, we'll have to wait to discuss it until later, when we have to come back here later for story reasons. This will give us a bit more context into its purpose at least. As we exit, Hornet meets us at the top and implores us to choose the fate of Hallownest, continue its perpetual stasis, or face the heart of the infection. Since we've already done the Grimm Troupe DLC, and we know that the Nightmare's heart is a higher being, it doesn't take much to jump to the conclusion that the infection's heart is also a higher being of some kind. Plus, we need a final boss somehow, but it's still a bit more complicated than that. For now, we're left to do whatever we want, basically. We still have 2 areas to find and explore, and though we've discovered the Abyss, we still don't have a means to accomplish what Hornet wants from us, and with no clues on how to accomplish that, we're left directionless. The place that I'm going to go is back to Dirtmouth, where we can fight our final dream boss, and another that, like White Defender, was added via the Hidden Dreams DLC. Heading back into Bretta's house as she's fawning over that lying, cheating bastard Zote, we can head into her basement to find a statue dedicated to his cowardliness. If we dream nail it, we'll enter a dream where we can face the idealized version of that son of a bitch, and so begins Grey Prince Zote. GPZ is hilarious. It's a perfect fit for the character, and has some of the most well-tuned animations and mannerisms to a personality that this game has, and the sexy Bretta in the background and the Zotelings fanning her are just the cherry on top. That said, Grey Prince Zote is by far my least favorite fight in the game. For whatever reason, I just have a really hard time reading his tells, and the fight more or less becomes a luck fest on whether I get a good pattern. I've spent hours grinding this fight out, and I've barely improved, so I've resigned myself to just being really bad at it. The most I've been able to figure out is that you're better off shade dashing through him when he runs at you, but that's situational at best. Like White Defender, you can challenge GPZ multiple times, and the first and third times you beat him, Bretta's Dream Nail dialogue changes, as you're subconsciously making her doubt her new hero. Good. He doesn't deserve the praise, and Bretta, even though you're a fucking idiot for falling for his shithead persona, you deserve better than he can possibly give. The 4th time you beat GPZ, Bretta is nowhere to be found, while Zote is still boasting, proving that he never even knew that she was there to begin with. Talking to Elderbug reveals that she left, presumably to a better life. Good for her. However, now that we've fought every dream boss, I think it's finally time to go back to the Seer. When we last saw her, she asked us to collect 200 essence. Lucky for us, we are well past that by now, and in fact, we can easily complete this entire quest line right here and now. In order, the rewards you get for this quest are access to the Spirit's Glade, Pale Ore, Dream Wielder, a Vessel Fragment, the Dreamgate ability, an Arcane Egg, a Mask Shard, and the Awoken Dream Nail. Once you collect 2400 essence, the Seer marvels at the night and seems to recall more about her tribe, the Moth Tribe. Like the Mosskin tribe in Greenpath, hers was born from the will of a higher being, a light even brighter than essence. However, when the Pale King entered the picture, the Moth Tribe turned their backs on the light that created them, though memories still lingered and dreams were had. The Seer then drops the absolute bomb that the entirety of Hallownest now dreams of this forgotten light. I don't know about you, but to me, that screams of what Hornet referred to as the heart of the infection. After all, as we started to see with Myla, this infection doesn't affect a bug's physical body, but their mind. If someone or something was invading the minds and dreams of bugs, that might cause them to lose themselves as those in Hallownest have en masse. We now have our opponent, the light that was brighter than essence. A higher being to rival the Pale King, which was left forgotten when the latter came to Hallownest, what the Seer refers to as the Radiance, before fading away into essence. The Spirit's Glade that we now have access to isn't much to see. It's a bunch of bugs that don't hold any relevance to Hallownest. They, along with the names listed in a secret area accessible by dream nailing this statue from this hidden corner, are dedications to the Kickstarter backers that helped Team Cherry get this game off the ground. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for getting one of my favorite games all the way to release. Okay guys, 2 areas left, and we're heading to one now. Go to the Hidden Station Stag, go past this dead armor that we can totally interact with now that we have the Awoken Dream Nail, but I definitely don't want to do. Go up, finally use the tram pass we got in Deepnest, and head to the right. You'll end up in Kingdom's Edge, but very early on you'll find 2 bees and a breakable wall that leads to the Hive. This area is incomplete, or at least it feels that way. Whereas other areas are fully fleshed out and have deep lore behind them, or a cool boss to enjoy, the Hive just kind of feels like it's there. It definitely has the feeling of a tacked on addition that they only decided to keep late in development, and thus didn't have time to fully flesh out. I can say with some confidence that this accusation has a bit of truth to it because they had to add an entirely new boss to the game in the Lifeblood DLC to make this area not the most boring in the game. Even then, I'm not sure it was entirely successful because the Hive Knight isn't that great of a boss when compared with NKG or White Defender, both DLC bosses as well. In terms of lore, the Hive and the bees that reside here were ruled by a queen bee, Vespa, who may or may not have clashed or disliked the Pale King, as she walled off her kingdom from the rest of Hollownest so the bees wouldn't have to deal with them. However, she eventually died, leaving the bees weak enough to be taken by the infection that took the rest of the kingdom. The Hive Knight seems to have retained his sense of loyalty and guards Vespa's lifeless husk, forcing the knight to kill him. However, because the Hive was so dull, instead of trying to delve any deeper, I want to talk about magic spells and nail arts. Why am I discussing both of these at the same time? Because I don't have enough to talk about them individually to fill an entire section. To start with spells, you have 3 in the game: Vengeful Spirit, Desolate Dive, and Howling Wraiths, which can be upgraded into Shade Soul, Descending Dark, and Abyss Shriek to deal much more damage. Spells are, in a word, broken. As hell. For the majority of the game, pound for pound, spells are going to be much more powerful than your nail hits, at the cost of the resource you use to heal. I find the problem with spells to lie less with their use and more with their implementation, namely how they're introduced. Both Vengeful Spirit and Desolate Dive are introduced first as a tool to solve environmental problems, not as viable combat options. That, along with the heavy cost and relative challenge of Hollow Knight for a first-time player, discouraged me from ever using them in combat. It was only on repeat playthroughs and watching more skilled players than me that I realized just how useful they were for completely shutting down some fights. Oblables, Hornet, Broken Vessel, Fail Champion, Dung Defender, all these bosses are heavily vulnerable against one or more spells, simply because of how they move and interact with the knockback mechanics inherent to the spells, and some of these are considered pretty challenging fights. And because of how easy these battles eventually become, I'm joining a vocal minority of the community that actually wants a hard mode that buffs enemy health, speed, and damage. You can overcharm to take double damage as it is, but that won't change how easy it becomes to react to these bosses, ensuring that you'll rarely get hit anyway after a certain point of skill. But enough about spells, they're actually not my favorite combat option in the game. No, that honor belongs to nail arts, and let me tell you, going the whole first playthrough without them hurt me more than you know. Nail arts initially seem pretty useless, or they're only for the experienced player. After all, they take so long to charge up that you can't realistically use them in a combat scenario without being intimately familiar with the encounter, right? Well, yes, but I promise things get better once you get the Nailmaster's Glory Charm from Sly. It only costs a single charm notch and basically doubles the speed that nail arts charge. This, along with their raw damage and reach, makes them incredibly useful in select scenarios. I find them especially useful against Troopmaster Grimm, Soul Tyrant, and especially Brooding Moloch, whose swipe isn't as long as the Cyclone Slash, letting you do a ton of damage and build up a ton of soul to burn it down with spells. And in the Hive, there are a couple of grubs, a Mask Shard, and the Hive Blood Charm for those curious. Because there wasn't really a better or worse time to do it, I went ahead and took care of some of those shade doors that we couldn't get past without Shade Cloak. First, in Deepnest, we can get to the Sharp Shadow Charm if we head left from the tram station, accessible via the ancient Basin tram. As well, we saw a shade door in Kingdom's Edge, which we can get through now, and which leads us to our second to last warrior dream. Now, you might be saying that we've already completed the Seers questline, so the essence we would get from this is useless, right? Well, that's true, but in order to access all of the final DLC, we'll need to beat every single boss, save a select few, so here we are. Markoth is easily the most difficult warrior dream, and not in an entirely fair way. This first encounter with him isn't too bad, all things considered, but even now, he can spawn projectiles from off-screen, and in no set pattern. This would already be pretty tough, but he also has a shield that rotates around him and changes directions at random, and he also doesn't float in any set path either. Hitting this guy is extremely difficult, and honestly, I'm just glad I have safe ground to stand on for now, because we will not always have that, believe me. me. Markoth was a member of the Moth tribe who secluded himself and meditated in this cave to try and uncover a truth long forgotten, presumably of the Radiance and how to either defeat it or circumvent the infection. He died here, with no mention made of whether he died naturally, by his own hand at the call of the infection, or if he was attacked, though Markoth claims that his defeat at the hands of the Knight is his first loss. Once again, we see that theme of arrogance or delusion with Markoth, who thought he could free himself from some long-forgotten truth by hiding away. From here, we have one more major area to explore in Hallownest. We've seen the highs and lows of the kingdom, we've seen some areas that have impressed, others that haven't, some bosses to fight, and others to think are really disgusting. But eventually, we will run out of things to do. Let's get one step closer to that, shall we? I make the mistake of trying to enter this final area through Deepnest at first, only to remember that you have to open the path from the other side, so all I get to see here is the Mask Maker. Like those bugs in Harris House, this guy is a complete anomaly, with next to no lore surrounding him. He claims to make the masks for the bugs of Hallownest, but none of the masks we see correspond to masks worn by other bugs, so yeah, I don't know. If you use dive near him, his face changes, possibly hinting at a connection to the Knight due to a force we'll discuss later, and its visual similarities with the Mask Maker, but beyond that, I've got nothing to say. The actual place we need to go is Queen's Station to access this place through Fog Canyon. Going the way we went to get Howling Wraiths, but instead of going up, we head left, we'll find ourselves in the Queen's Gardens, our final area. Though the gardens may seem most similar to Greenpath, it also has connections with Fungal Waste through its enemies, because we're fighting the Mantis tribe again, or rather the Mantis traders. To start with this connection to Greenpath, Un also created this area via its dreams, but at some point, the Pale King annexed it into Hallownest, willingly or not, to serve as a retreat for his queen. As stated before, the Mantis tribe was able to resist the infection, but as it turns out, that wasn't unanimously true. While it's unclear whether some Mantises were simply weaker than others and thus succumbed, it's at least known that some willingly embraced the infection for the power it offered them, which they wanted to use to gain territory outside of their village. However, they were instead cast out by the Mantis Lords and eventually ended up here in Queen's Gardens, having completely lost their minds at some point along the way. Moving through the area is fairly straightforward, with only one major detour to take away from our horseshoe, which is to keep heading down and right to pick up the love key at the beginning. Beyond that, move left and then up, eventually opening a shortcut back to the beginning, and if you keep heading up, you'll reach the boss room of the area, and actually, you know, I can't help but feel like I'm forgetting something. I'm sure we'll run into her again, and I definitely won't be a dumbass that forgot to find her before she became important. Surely that won't happen. Surely. Fuck! Entering the boss room, you'll be met with a few mantises to fight, before suddenly, Cloth drops down and helps you fight them. After another round, the boss shows up, Trader Lord, the brother of the Mantis Lords from Fungal Wastes, and the leader of the Exiles. This fight has been heavily modified and improved from the initial release of Hollow Knight, but with how far along we are in our power level, I was able to mostly tank through it. Mostly. All I will say is that it's clear that the game requires you to have Shade Dash at this point, as a lot of Trader Lord's attacks seem to be designed around them. Unfortunately, Cloth doesn't survive the battle, though she takes Trader Lord with her, and with her death, I think we can talk about her finally. Cloth is a fan-favorite character, and for good reason. Her cowardly nature is incredibly endearing, especially because it doesn't ever serve as a hindrance to the player in any way, which would have docked her some points. There's also a bit of added depth that you can only really appreciate with two distinct playthroughs. If you don't find Cloth in Ancient Basin, she won't be here to help you and die against Trader Lord, leading to her going to Dirtmouth instead. There, you can learn that she came to Hallownest, in part, to die a heroic death in order to join her departed partner, Nola. So, when she says Nola is waiting on a first playthrough, it comes off like Cloth is either unaware of or in denial of her own death, but it takes on a much more somber and poignant meaning once you know the full story. It's a great bit of writing. I always take Cloth's essence here, just to gain some of her ultimately boundless courage into myself, but then that's just me being sappy. As we continue on, we'll come to a hut that has a dead knight outside, while inside we meet a mysterious being called the White Lady, the wife of the Pale King and the Queen of Hallownest, who drops a ton of lore bombs onto us, not only hinting at Hornet's connection to Hera, but hinting about the Hollow Knight's true nature, as well as confirming beyond a shadow of a doubt that the knight is not a unique specimen, as she's been waiting for one like the knight Night, not the night itself. Upon us, she bequeaths the White Fragment, one of 2 that we'll need to collect to access the true ending and the final DLC. As we head back around to get to the rest of the Queen's Gardens and our final warrior dream, let's wrap up talking about the 5 Great Knights of Hallownest, because this dead knight outside the White Lady's hut is the final one, Drya, who gave her life to protect the White Lady from the Mantis traders that threatened her. Once again, we see the recurring element of tragedy with the 5 Great Knights. Drya was apparently a great warrior and defended her queen until the bitter end, and yet, the Mantises lived on. If the night hadn't arrived, who knows how long it would have taken before the Trader Lord made it to the White Lady. As well, the White Lady doesn't even know of her sacrifice, and so she'll never be mourned or honored for her vigilance. In many ways, the tales of the 5 Great Knights represent the journey of Hallownest in general, and each of their fates is representative of portions of the kingdom. Some have disappeared, others mindlessly guard beings long dead and forgotten. Some perish for seemingly no reason, others pay the ultimate price for their defiance against the will of the infection, and still others are left alive, but in eternal suffering. There are very few happy endings in Hollow Knight, even in 2 of the game's 5 endings, and that makes it all the more motivating to finally achieve that for the kingdom as a whole. Somehow, some way, even if the path there isn't clear even now. In any case, at the end of this long path we'll find our last warrior dream. Easily the most simplistic in terms of both lore and the fight itself, as Marmu just bounces toward the knight over and over again. As well, it very simplistically follows the warrior dream's theme of arrogance and delusion. Marmu foolishly believed herself strong enough to protect Queen's Gardens, but died even before the White Lady returned to stay forever, so who knows how long she would have lasted against the Mantises. But with that, we've finished up all that we can do here in the final area, which must mean that we're close to being done, right? Well, you're partly right and partly wrong. In terms of unique content, most of what we have left to do is either in the final DLC or is collectathon stuff. Skip to this point in the video if you want to get past the collection and move on to the rest of the narrative, because I'm going to go through this for a few minutes. Just to take care of some stuff right off the bat, finding this final stag station unlocks the Stagnest stag, which gives us our final vessel fragments, along with some of the collectathon rewards from Sly and the Seer. Next, we can finally take care of the flower quest, because the grave that Zemmer wants us to take it to is located in Queen's Gardens. As part of this quest, we have to traverse the full horizontal length of Hallownest, including going through some of Queen's Gardens and a lot of the infected Forgotten Crossroads, without taking a single hit, or using stag stations or using Dreamgate to warp to where we need to go. This is one of the more annoying things to do in the game, but it's entirely doable if you learn the proper route, or if you're extremely careful. First, go through the tunnels and cross Blue Lake to get to Salubra's house. Go to the right, avoid these enemies, go up and left, avoid these golems and enemies, go right, go back to the Cornifer room, head right and go through this acid shortcut to get to Fog Canyon, and get all the way to Queen's Gardens entrance from there, which is pretty easy since we can just Shade Soul bombs and swim under everything else. This is the hard part, and I tend to use spells to completely bypass the danger of these enemies. Don't be like me and go the wrong way back up to the Trader Lord room. Instead, follow the stag station directions and then go left here, get through this final spike gauntlet, and there you go. Now we can warp back to Zemmer and she'll fade away into our last mask shard. See, that wasn't so bad, was it? From here, we don't have many new areas to explore, and with the exception of one boss that we'll get to in this section, we don't have any more unique combat encounters, so let's go through a quick checklist of everything we need for 112%, which is the maximum completion of the game. We need to fight all the bosses, which is almost done. We need to beat every Dreamer, which we did a while ago. We need to collect every charm in the game. We need to collect every grub, and we need to collect every upgrade. We also need to complete the Seer's questline, already done. We need to go back and do the Trial of the Fool in the Colosseum, and we need to do and find all content that comes with every major DLC pack. Hidden Dreams, which doesn't actually add percentage because GPZ and White Defender don't add to our completion number, Grimm Troupe, which has its whole quest line and a bunch of charms, Lifeblood, which added Hive Knight, and Godmaster, which we'll be doing at the end because it could be considered the true ending. In addition, we need to collect every Mask Shard and Vessel Fragment, which is already done, we need to get every spell and nail art, which is done, and we need to fully upgrade our nail, which we can go ahead and do now once we collect our last Pale Ore from the Grub Father. Once we hand over 3 Pale Ore and a whopping 4k geo, the nailsmith is brought to deep contemplation over the purity of the nail he's forged. Possibly out of despair at the state of the kingdom, or more likely because he feels that he's accomplished everything he possibly could when it comes to his craft, the nailsmith asks you to kill him with your pure nail. However, we know about a certain nail master that also fell out of love with his craft, so we know that there's still meaning to be found in the world, so we're gonna spare him. Sure enough, if we return to Shio's hut in Greenpath, the nailsmith is there, having joined him in his new journey to master the world of art and creation. It's a nice little ending to this nice little character. From here, let's take care of the final optional boss. Back at Kingdom's Edge, there was a small detour we could have taken to this tower that was blocked by a door. With the love key we got in Queen's Gardens, we can open it and fight the Collector. As a boss, he's nothing special, just jumping around and spawning enemies to harass you. With spells and our pure nail, it's not that hard. In lore, he's a creature of the same ilk as the Knight, made of that black liquid that we are as a shade. It's not clear what the implication is of this, whether the Collector was a vessel the same way that the Knight and Hollow Knight were, but in the end, he became obsessed with preserving life within Hallownest, in his own way. He even preserves your shade if you die while fighting him, which is a cool detail. After we defeat him, we can find 3 grubs locked in his tower, along with his map which details the locations of all the grubs he hid away. That's right, he was the reason they're scattered all across the Dead Kingdom. Also, this was the fight that got me to 100%, which I thought was fitting. And I think it's time that we go collect the stragglers. I personally have a few in City of Tears, one in Kingdom's Edge, Crystal Peak, one in Forgotten Crossroads, one in Greenpath, and one in Deepnest. If we go back to Grubfather with every grub freed, he'll give us the Grubberfly's Elegy charm. If we come back after quitting out, we'll find that the Grubfather has eaten every single grub. While this could be interpreted as him being a vile monster, and he is, the Grubberfly's Elegy charm says that this is actually the next stage of a grub's life cycle and is completely natural. Sure, whatever you say, he's still a monster. From here, we shall have 4 charms to collect, the first of which we'll find in the Abyss. With Fragile Heart, Lifeblood Heart, and Joni's Blessing equipped, along with all mask shards, we can get through this door that requires us to have 15 Lifeblood masks, which leads to a one-time access room with an Arcane Egg, that I didn't collect, along with the Lifeblood Core charm. Next, we can find the Deep Focus charm from this hidden Crystal Peak room just down from Cornifer. In the room just before False Night, we can break the ceiling to access the Glowing Womb charm. Finally, in Greenpath, we can get across the Lake of Un that we found after fighting Hornets, and actually meet Un, who has hidden himself away in the farthest corner of his kingdom. Without speaking a word, he gives us the shape of Un charm and disappears. With that, we've collected every optional charm in the game, though Salubra still won't give us her blessing, because we still have 1 collectible left to get. If we head back to the hidden station and go to that white corpse, we'll finally be able to do stuff with it. Now that we have the Awoken Dream Nail, we can pierce through the shield around it and access the White Palace. Now, for such a story-important area, the lore around this place is surprisingly scarce. Basically, it was the stronghold of the Pale King, where he ruled over Hallownest. However, when the infection returned when the seal around the Hollow Knight failed, the Pale King seemingly fled and took his palace with him into the Dream Realm. In gameplay, however, this is a massive, difficult platforming challenge, the likes of which you've never seen in Hallownest. We've had short gauntlets aplenty, but this beast takes upward of 20 minutes of straight platforming. In addition, the Grimm Troupe DLC added another, even harder platforming challenge called the Path of Pain, which is entirely optional. Reaching the end of it lets us see a moment between the Pale King and a young Hollow Knight, which isn't worth it at all, but I still did it for the Vine. I don't really have anything to say about the place gameplay-wise, because I don't particularly like the platforming in Hollow Knight. I find it kind of clunky and unintuitive with how the knight moves, because the movement system in this game was clearly designed around the combat, where it feels great. Here, however, I don't know, I just don't like it. But now that we're here, we can finally discuss the Pale King. The Pale King is a higher being a la the White Lady and Un, who came to a barbaric Hallownest and gave the bugs sentience and protection. Though his rule wasn't unanimously accepted, such as from the Mantis and Spider tribes, his kingdom was seen as an overall good in the lore of Hollow Knight. However, the Radiance, another higher being, was forgotten about due to the Pale King's arrival. It's unclear whether she was the ruler of what Hallownest was before the Pale King as a whole, or if only the Moth tribe worshipped her, but either way, she began exerting her will over the bugs of Hallownest, forcing them to dream of her and making them lose themselves. This is the true source of the infection. In a desperate bid to save his kingdom, the Pale King found the Hollow Knight and sealed it away in the Black Egg Temple by using 3 Dreamers, hoping that it would contain the infection. Alas, it didn't work, and the Pale King fled to the Dream Realm, as we'll see at the end of the White Palace, to die. The Pale King has always struck me as a very compassionate character. As far as we know, he never had any particularly malicious intent for Hallownest, and he never abused the power granted to him by its inhabitants. He allows the Mantis, Spider, and Bee tribes to live away from Hallownest, and he gave the bugs sentience. However, it also appears that, as the infection grew worse and he became more desperate, he made some questionable decisions. Sealing away not one, but 4 beings in a plan that ultimately failed anyway, willingly being unfaithful to the White Lady with Hera to accomplish that plan, running away when the infection returned, and so on. Perhaps then, instead of compassionate, he was idealistic. He came to Hallownest to give the bugs that inhabited it true life, and believed that he could set things right. Then, when he couldn't, when he sacrificed so much for nothing, he might have simply given in to despair. Until ultimately, he perished. Alone in a world made of his dreams. It's sad, really. With the other half of the white fragment we get from the White Palace, we now have the King's Soul Charm, and we can get Salubra's Blessing, which I hate for the noise it makes when sitting on a bench. But anyway, one would think that this is what we need to combat the Radiance, but no. Remember, the Pale King was ultimately helpless to stop the infection, so what makes you think a charm born from his power would do anything to stop it? No, while the Pale King had made the mistake of sealing away the Hollow Knight, the mistake didn't lay with the idea. To combat this harsh, oppressive light, you'll need to find an equally oppressive darkness. A darkness like the kind found in the Abyss. If we return there with the King's Soul equipped, a new path will open which leads to a black egg. If we dreamnail our reflection, we'll finally learn the true origins of the Knight and Hollow Knight. These creatures, vessels which contain shades, were made by the Pale King and White Lady from both their power and the power of the darkness in the Abyss, a substance known as Void. It was wild, untamed, and uncontrollable, but the vessels held it within them. The Pale King sought the ultimate vessel to contain the infection. A pure vessel, the one that became known as the Hollow Knight, leaving behind thousands of dead vessels and the shades they left behind. No cost too great, no mind to think, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering. Born of God and Void, you shall seal the blinding light that plagues their dreams. You are the vessel. You are the Hollow Knight. It's a horrific scene, haunting in the sheer amount of death, chaos, and betrayal that the Pale King wrought in his quest to stop the infection. And in the end, he found his pure vessel. However, by taking it with him, raising it as his own, and training it to contain the infection, he corrupted its purity. As the White Lady says, it was tarnished by an idea instilled. The idea? The love that the Pale King had for his pure vessel, and the love the pure vessel gave in return. That small bit of humanity was all the Radiance needed to break the seal. It gave the Hollow Knight a voice to cry suffering. However, now that the Knight remembers this event, and with the King's Soul in hand, it unites the Void for the first time, tainting the King's Soul into the Voidheart charm. And with the darkness of Hallownest at our backs, we're finally ready to face the source of the infection. Yeah, let's get hyped up for the final boss, for real this time, and... oh wait. Yeah... no, but I want to fight the final boss. Fine, let's go do the Trial of the Fool really quick. It gives like 3 KGO, it sucks, you fight a non-boss and God Tamer, moving on. Also, because it didn't really fit in naturally when I was talking about it, there's also Divine from the Grimm Troupe, the only member to linger after the ritual is completed. She can eat all of your fragile charms, and for an extremely high price, will turn them unbreakable. With 15 KGO, oh my god, we can get the Unbreakable Strength charm, for example. But now, for real, let's go back to the Black Egg Temple. Outside, with Voidheart, we'll find Hornet, who will help us if the opportunity arises. For the first of 2 new endings we have access to now, we can fight Hollow Knight again. After a certain point, Hornet will attack and break its mask with her needle. It's fairly obvious what you're supposed to do, but you can just as easily finish the fight as normal. The ending here is mostly the same as before, with the Knight absorbing the infection and the Black Egg Temple sealing once again. However, this time, the mask of Hornet appears on the door, signifying that she's now become a dreamer. This ending is perhaps the only one considered definitively non-canonical, considering Silksong stars Hornet sometime after Hollow Knight takes place. However, what we're supposed to do is dream nail the Hollow Knight, entering its dreams where we can face the source of the infection, the Radiance, the original final boss of Hollow Knight. We've already discussed the Radiance when talking about several other characters, so there's not really much to say about her in that sense. However, just as how the Grimmkin enemies trained you for Nightmare King Grimm, in many ways the Warrior Dream bosses have trained you for the Radiance. The Wall of Light and Raining Down of Spears are similar to Elder Hu's Barrage of Pancakes, her Sword Summon is similar to Gorb's attack, the Projectile Ball is similar to Galeon, Markoth, Zero, and even Marmu to some extent, and the Horizontal Spears are similar to No Eyes. However, this is not only all of that at once, but it's significantly harder and faster than any of those. The Radiance is certainly a tough fight, especially if you rush here without getting everything like I did. However, with a ton of spells, Quick Slash, the Pure Nail, Shaman Stone, and Leet Gamer skills, we managed to defeat her, and with the Void united within us, and the Hollow Knight Shade to open the way, we can finally defeat her and end the infection once and for all. In the ending, Hornet wakes up after the battle to find the Knight's mask broken and all of the shades, their purpose complete, fading back into the abyss as Hallownest wakes up after so long. After all of the hardship we've endured, all of the suffering that Hallownest has endured at the hands of the malicious Light of the Radiance, it finally got its happy ending. But that's not all we can do. I don't really like this, but if we equip the Spore Shroom charm and go around Hallownest to find this character called Mr. Mushroom 7 times, we'll get another ending scene after the credits, showing him flying away before cutting to a to be continued screen. I am 100% convinced that this is Team Cherry trolling the player, because nothing of what he says ever makes sense, and I have no idea what the point of this character or this ending is. But, with everything else completed, we still only have 107% completion, leaving 5 points on the table. This is where we get to the final DLC, Godmaster. In a new path in the Royal Waterways, we can find the Junk Pit, where there's a corpse that we can unlock with a simple key, and gives us the God Tuner, which, at this point, is a useless item. If we came here earlier and got it, it would have been able to show us when Pantheons open, but since we've beaten every boss, we don't need that, because we know that they're all open. If we dream nail the corpse, it will take us to Godhome, the hub of the DLC, where we can essentially find a boss rush mode of 2 varieties. First, there's the Hall of Gods, where we can fight every boss in the game on 3 difficulties. Attuned, which is the default that we fought in the main game, Ascended, which is a harder variant with more health and occasionally a different arena, and Radiant, which is Ascended, but the knight dies in 1 hit. As well, in the main progression of the DLC, we have the Pantheons, boss rush gauntlets which end with fights unique to this DLC. To start, we have 3 available to us, the Pantheon of the Master, the Pantheon of the Artist, and the Pantheon of the Sage, each ending with fights against Oro and Mato, Shio, and finally Great Nail Sage Sly. The concepts seen in these fights are those that we've seen before, so I don't really feel a great need to go into them in super fine detail, but they are some of my favorite fights in the game. Oro and Mato feel like a more fun and complex remix of the Watcher Knights fights, with multiple opponents in a gauntlet of sorts. However, with the addition of their nail arts and a dedicated jump attack, along with the smaller arena, the fight feels a lot more personal and claustrophobic than Watcher Knights, which you can usually burn down with spells anyway. Shio is just a fantastic fight, and my favorite of the 3. He has 4 attacks, each corresponding with 1 color on his brush. Red is a jump AoE followed by a slam, blue is a slash which spawns projectiles in an arc, yellow is a thrust which acts as a long range option, and magenta is his great slash equivalent which then rains down projectiles. It's a great fight, but it definitely takes some time to read the strange tells, as you haven't yet had to pay attention to the color of the attack. Sly, meanwhile, is arguably the worst fight of the 3. His slashes are super disjointed and pretty basic, all things considered. I tend to just use nail arts a bunch, and in his second phase, I do the same. I find it a bit tedious, but it's still a decent encounter, I suppose. Beating the first 3 Pantheons unlocks Godseeker mode, which you can select from the new game menu to start in Godhome without having to play through the rest of the game. As we continue into the Pantheon of the Night, which is unlocked after you beat the first 3, I'll mention the bindings, which I didn't show off for this video because even I have to draw the line somewhere. They are optional restrictions that unlock lifeblood masks for future attempts. They have 4 effects, and you can activate any and all of them at once. They can restrict the amount of soul you can collect to 1 heal or 1 cast of magic. They can reduce your nail damage by 80%. They can restrict the number of masks you have to 4, though this can be increased with Lifeblood and the Fragile/Unbreakable Heart charms, or it could take away all charm effects. This last one sticks out to me as particularly brutal, as many aspects of play rely on the modifications made by charms. Going back to no charms feels like you're neutering yourself much more so than with the other bindings, in my opinion at least. At the end of the Pantheon of the Night, we fight the Pure Vessel, or the Hollow Knight in its prime, and this is by far my favorite fight in the entire game. It's faster than the Hollow Knight, more precise in its attacks, and must be practiced to survive, especially since it deals 2 masks of damage. And while fighting the Hollow Knight can give you a decent head start on learning it, really there isn't any bigger of a jump between a normal boss's difficulty and its harder variant than between Hollow Knight and Pure Vessel. The best piece of advice I can give is to not be greedy. Only attack the Pure Vessel once after each of its attacks. Otherwise, you won't be able to consistently dodge its follow-up. When it does the slash combo, jump and down pogo to parry it, and then attack right after to do the same thing. Before this video happened, I actually assumed beating Pure Vessel was the limit of my capabilities as a player, but no, I refuse to accept that. After a few more attempts, I beat the Pantheon of the Night, and from there, with Void Heart in hand, it opens the way to the final challenge that Hollow Knight has to offer: the Pantheon of Hallownest. I want to put the difficulty of this challenge into perspective. My first attempt at it took place in the 17th piece of footage I got. Aside from one video, I spent every single one of them past that attempting to beat P5 or practicing its bosses. I didn't finish until video number 24. In total, it took me at least 10 attempts, plus whatever attempts I put in before this particular playthrough. And you know the sad part? In half of them, it wasn't even the hardest part that killed me. It was this fucking guy! And you know the even sadder part? He's not required to unlock P5, and if I didn't fight him in the main game, he wouldn't be here in P5, so all of that suffering was entirely my own doing. I'm gonna go through my first and last attempts at P5, because both ended up going almost all the way. In this first attempt, my charm loadout was Nail Art and Spell focused, with Dreamwielder, Shaman Stone, Spell Twister, Nailmaster's Glory, Quick Slash, and Steady Body. This was a pretty unoptimized build. I probably should have kept on Grub Song if I wanted more spells, for example. However, this was my go-to for my general playstyle, as it may not have excelled at anything, but it was good at everything without changing the core of how I fought. Immediately when you start this Pantheon, you'll notice that all of the fights take place in their Ascended versions, though with reduced health to compensate for this being a gauntlet. Vengefly King and Grubsmother still fall pretty easily, though Grubsmother takes an absolutely ridiculous amount of health from me that I have to heal off. It's not that big of a deal though, as False Knight is next, and the Dream Nail plus an exploit means that he's just Soul Battery for the rest of the Pantheon. Mossy is as easy as ever, and Hornet is absolutely melted by Quick Slash and Shade Soul, though, as you can see, I got a little sloppy because I wasn't used to Steady Body after playing without it for so long. Gorb is up next and took a few masks from me, but I was able to burn him down pretty easily. Dung Defender, at this point, is a total joke, and I got careless, but we got through it all the same. Soul Warrior is an even bigger joke, but again, I was careless. Really, no spells are necessary, just burn him down. Here against Brooding Moloch, I apparently forgot that I have Nail Arts, but we still beat him. Next are Oro and Mado, who I took out fairly easily as well. It also helps that I know I can afford to be a bit more careless here because I'll have a rest room right after this fight, so I try to burn them down quickly and succeed. From here we have Zero, whose arena stands out as one of the more challenging in this early portion of P5 compared to his normal one, but he still falls to spells. Crystal Guardian is another Soul Battery as far as I'm concerned, but I can't really take advantage of it with Soul Master, whose teleporting and low health means I can burn him down with nail hits just as easily. However, that changes with Oblobles, which is one of my least favorite fights, so I just burn them down with spells to get them over with. Next is Mantis Lords, who actually have a unique variant within P5 called the Sisters of Battle, where all 3 of them fight against you as opposed to just 1 or 2. This makes it really fast paced and definitely in the top 5 fights in the entire game for me. However, because I've fought these ladies 1,000 times, I get through it without too much trouble, even without practicing. I'm also not that worried because we have another rest room right after them. Next is Marmu, which I burned down with spells because this arena is way too small for her and she bounces everywhere without it. Fluke is another I just burned down with spells, and Broken Vessel, at this point, is so slow that I consider it to be just another soul battery. Galeon is the first fight in P5 that can go horribly wrong. I just have never been able to get down the way his projectiles move, so I try to burn him down, though in later attempts he gives me a lot of trouble. Up next is Shio, who I've also fought way too many times, so despite my low health, I beat him pretty easily. After another rest room, we have Hive Knight, who is as unremarkable here as he was in the base game, though he does frame trap me a couple times here. This is followed by Elder who I can use the dash slash on to maximize damage, and generally think as lowly of him now as I do in the base game. The Collector is one of the more challenging Ascended fights because the enemies he spawns are upgraded to their harder variants. Mostly, this means that I need to use a lot of Nail Arts and Shade Souls to kill them easily and keep them, mostly the Primal Aspids, off my back. Even then, I get down to 3 masks here, and have to be very careful with my soul against Godtamer, who I try to burn down but get nearly wiped. Who knows how this would have went if it hit me when I was using Cyclone Slash. From here, I nearly choke hard to Troupe Master Grimm, but managed to eke out a few heals here and there to secure the W, and we get a rest room right after anyway. From here, we're going to be fighting some of the later bosses and tougher variants, so this is where the fun begins. We also run into the main NPC of the Godmaster DLC, the Godseeker, musing over the higher being Un. Watcher Knights aren't that big of a problem at this point, and though I take a few more hits than necessary purely due to carelessness, I still win. After this is Uwu, who we fight without Quirrell. Instead, it summons the exploding jellyfish, which we have to hit into it. I come dangerously close to dying here, but manage to win despite that. After this, we have another new boss, Flying Nosk, who is not only easier than regular Nosk, but just as bad and annoying. Moving on, Great Nail Slade Sly, aside from all of these hits that I take, goes about as textbook as can be. I don't know, I'm just too slow to react to his Great Slash sometimes. Unlike his pupils, his fight doesn't lead into a rest room. Instead, we have to fight Hornet 2, who, after Sly, runs a high risk of sniping you into death sometimes. Thankfully, I'm a professional, and maintain my composure for the win. And now we have the hard part. I mean, after we beat up Enraged Guardian, we have the hard part. I mean, after Lost Kin, we have the hard part. No Eyes is another Ascended arena that's a bigger difficulty spike than normal. On one attempt, looks like I was interrupted here, I guess. You know, probably someone calling me from work or something. There we go. Anyway, there was one attempt that I was hit into spikes and immediately hit again when I respawned. It was ridiculous. After this, I very nearly choked a Trader Lord, who I theoretically should never get hit by, and then also almost choked a White Defender, who, admittedly, I got lucky with his bounce combo, rather than actually earning this victory. Thankfully, we have another rest room here, followed by Godseeker musing over the White Lady. From here, Soul Tyrant, despite being fast, isn't too big of a threat, and we kill him fairly easily with a lucky ground spawn in the second phase. From here, we get into a string of 3 brutal encounters. Markoth loses the ground, so we need to platform while avoiding his randomly spawning projectiles and somehow find him through his shield. I am really, really bad at this fight, and just barely make it through with 3 masks and no soul. And then we get to him. He's the 5th to last boss that we fight. Yeah, in addition to being my worst fight, he's also right at the end. Somehow, someway, I survived this encounter, which I chalk up entirely to getting a lucky pattern with staggers and attacks. I take no credit for this victory. After this, we fight Failed Champion, whose 2 mask hits run the risk of absolutely demolishing you. However, past the first phase, you can soul battery him and burn him down from there, so the hardest sequence is over in my opinion. However, we still have 3 bosses left to fight. First up is NKG, who is as fast and tough as ever. However, like Sisters of Battle and Shio, I've fought him a lot, so I get through without much issue. From here, we come to our final rest room, the Godseeker looking for a Pale King who isn't there, and beyond lies the final two bosses, first being Pure Vessel. This Pure Vessel fight was sloppy, which was to be expected. I was pretty nervous by this point, and I very nearly lost the run right here, despite knowing that I could beat it. I think what saved me was a good follow-up attack to its 2 instances of the exploding orbs. If I got unlucky there, I probably wouldn't have been in the right state to be able to react to it. After this, we fight the true final boss of the entirety of Hollow Knight, the Absolute Radiance. In this attempt, I had absolutely no idea how to do this fight, and I died extremely quickly. But hey, I made it all the way. And then I proceeded to spend 3 hours fighting Absrad in the Hall of Gods because I knew I needed to, and beat her maybe 3 times. Absrad is by far the hardest fight in the game, and one of my favorites, though I absolutely despise her in the Pantheon of Hallownest entirely because of how it works. Unlike Radiance, you must be proactive when fighting Absrad, dealing with her attacks before they become a problem, and oftentimes you must be willing to sacrifice your damage uptime to do this. Even now that I've beaten P5, I still have trouble dealing with some of her attacks. The silver lining, the only one, is that the first phase doesn't have too much health, the second phase can be done pretty consistently without taking damage, and after that, you have the opportunity to heal, hopefully ensuring that you'll be set up to succeed come phase 3. However, phase 3's random factor is what got me more than anything. Depending on where Absrad spawns, you'll either get to hit her a lot, or you'll have to wade through attack after attack and never get the chance to retaliate. And as attacks come so quickly, you have to deal with them immediately, or you'll face 2 or 3 at the same time, and get hit multiple times and just die. Now, from how I'm describing it, it sounds like I don't like this fight, and if you asked me a month ago, I would tell you that I don't. However, skill does play a factor into things. While I consider myself far from a master, getting into a rhythm with Absrad is some of the most fun I've ever had in a game, and the thrill of even getting to phase 4 is a feeling that I can't even begin to describe, let alone actually beating her. It took me a solid hour of grinding the fight out to get even 1 victory, and it took me another 45 minutes to beat her again, but after that, things just kinda started to click. I was confident that within 2 or 3 more attempts of P5, I would have it in the bag. I then proceeded to die to her twice at the end of the Pantheon, and then get bodied by this fucking piece of shit 5 times. I hate Great Prince Oat more than you can possibly know. As you watch me grind out both GPZ and Markoth so that I don't get bodied by them as hard, I want to run through the lore of the Godmaster DLC. Like Grimm Troupe, it confuses me a little, and I wish I had more context. In short, it revolves around this being called Godseeker, who comes from a faraway place with faraway gods that have either died or abandoned them. Godseeker came to Hallownest in search of new gods, having followed the power of the Pale King. However, upon arrival, they instead assumed the god of gods in Hallownest to be the Radiance, and attuned to her to make an even stronger version of this higher being, known as the Absolute Radiance. However, through the efforts of the Knight, who proves to be capable of growing into an entity known as the Lord of Shades, or the Void given Focus, were able to defeat the Absolute Radiance and, in doing so, grow powerful enough to consume the infection in its entirety without ever having to fight the physical being of the Radiance, sparing the Hollow Knight's life and leaving Hornet to her own adventures. The Enter the Void ending that comes with the Godmaster DLC is generally considered the true ending, as it provides the most good to Hallownest, with the Hollow Knight still alive to defend it should it need to. However, I believe that both it and the normal Radiance ending are equally canonical, at least pre-Silksong's release. Perhaps that game will be affected by one of these endings more than the other, proving one's canonicity. However, now that we have that out of the way, we get to experience my crowning achievement of Hollow Knight, when I finally bested the Pantheon of Hallownest. The early fights are pretty dull, and I've become so efficient at them that I actually circle back around to being reckless, but still, there's nothing worth talking about with them. I'll show the tail end of them on screen, but really quick, I just want to go over my final charm build. After a while, I realized that I wasn't taking advantage of the tool I use the most, the nail. So, I dropped both Dream Wielder and Spell Twister and put on Unbreakable Strength to maximize the damage of both my regular hits and my nail arts, which made the experience a lot smoother and faster. You'll see me using a lot more nail arts here, and just generally mowing through these early bosses. I mean, just look at how fast I beat Oro. There are several optimizations I found as I played. Pushing Soul Warrior and Hornet into a corner to maximize damage, Cyclone slashing Brooding Moloch to avoid its swipe, bunching up Lobbles together so Abyss Shriek hits both so I don't have to deal with phase 2 as long, etc. Sisters of Battle is still as fun as ever, and then we're back to the grind. Marmu dies to Abyss Shriek, Fluke Marm is a Soul Battery then dies to Abyss Shriek, and Broken Vessel is horribly slow and fragile. Galeon is the first fight that can go majorly wrong, and in fact killed the attempt before this one, though technically Shio dealt the finishing blow. Thankfully, he was feeling kind today, and Shio went down summarily afterwards. You can see I more consistently hit Elder Who with Dash Slash by moving toward the middle before he reappears. I can get Soul from Collector with Dream Nail when he's staggered. I can use Cyclone Slash to safely attack God Tamer, though I don't think I actually used it here. I use a bunch of Nail Arts against Grimm to speed up the fight, though he really liked to spam his Desperation move in this attempt. Still fairly easy. Watcher Knights were mostly fought one at a time thanks to my damage foresight. Uwu was beaten in one cycle, and I got more soul by dream nailing it, though I did run dangerously low on health. Thankfully, flying Nosk is easy as all hell. However, my brain apparently didn't get that memo, and I couldn't heal hardly for fucking shit, barely ending better than I started, if at all, and going up against Sly, that was not good. Thankfully, I had possibly the best Sly fight of my life, aside from one instance of my getting hit. I was just in the right place, I reacted perfectly, and it was beautiful. Hornet 2 fell in the same way, though I got caught twice by her counter, which is really dumb, and I kept running into her jump. Still, she's squishy, so we made it past her. Things didn't bode well when I actually got hit by Enraged Guardian, but I got my momentum back with a good Lost Kin fight, despite a rough middle portion. We still ended at full health for No Eyes, which I had become very proficient at. However, there was that triple hit, so that sucked. I had gotten into the habit of staying away from Trader Lord and using Shade Soul, but he wanted to be up close. I unfortunately took a hit, which made me a bit worried for White Defender, which had a habit of wearing me down suddenly, but thankfully with a bit of optimization with Cyclone Slash, I managed to just barely eke out a victory. I was sweating at the end there though. Soul Tyrant, as usual, isn't the most difficult fights in the world, and I was using Abyss Shriek during one of his attacks to better optimize damage, so it wasn't too big of an issue. And I got a lucky ground spawn again in phase 2. But now we come to Markoth. During my practice, the best trick I could find was to be patient and only attack when absolutely safe. However, even then, he had a habit of burning me down quickly if he ever got a hit in. What can I say? I just get flustered when he starts hitting me. And I ended up going into GPZ with only 4 masks, which spelled the end of this attempt. Thanks to my training, I managed to survive. The saying I started using when trying to beat P5 was, "Don't get attached until you beat Zote." Well, I beat him, so I was attached to this attempt now. We burned the first phase of Failed Champion, and we kicked his ass right after that. Final 3 fights. NKG, surprisingly, went really well. I choked pretty hard the last few fights with him, but this one was actually pretty textbook aside from this hit to the spikes at the end. But now, we come to Pure Vessel, and guys, this fight sucked. I choked so hard to this fight that it was not even funny. It was easily my most sloppy Pure Vessel since I became good enough to actually beat it. And my one problem with this fight cropped up here too, which is that even though you can Shade Dash through every other attack, you can't Shade Dash through the spikes it summons with its slams. But against all odds, we beat it, bringing us back to Absolute Radiance, which thankfully gives us a free heal. I'm just gonna let this fight play out. It came down to the last hit, and it's not the best fight in the world, but it was my best fight, so please enjoy. Also, seizure warning for the end, I guess. After defeating the Absolute Radiance, we finished Hollow Knight with 112% completion, which is the most that you can have. We actually missed a few things in this playthrough despite that. We didn't encounter Quirrell everywhere that we could have, we didn't get the Hunter's Mark, and there were a few NPCs that I skipped over because they were largely useless and I never bothered to run into them. But I think that this is a good overview of the experience of playing this game. In conclusion, Hollow Knight is one of the best games I've ever played. In writing this video, though I still think it's rather basic, I've come to appreciate the effort put into making Hallownest feel real and believable, with a rich history and, if not deep characters, then deep implications with its themes. So many games and stories in general have been using the darkness is actually good trope lately, but I feel that few do it better than Hollow Knight. I knew the gameplay was amazing from minute one, and I still think that way, so if only for that, please play this game. It's dirt cheap, and it feels like a AAA. It's amazing. Thank you all for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Until the end, my friends. Hey all, thank you so much for watching. This isn't going to be a usual thing for me to have something after the scripted part ends, but I just wanted to throw this in there that I am streaming. Currently we are trying to finish up Persona 3, and then once we're done with that, I'm going to be going full steam onto Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance. Currently shooting for 2 streams a week, Monday and Friday, although that is subject to change very soon, within about a month. But once Dream Drop Distance starts, I'm going to be trying to stream basically as much as I can, because I want to play that game and I want to get the footage recorded. And yeah, if you guys want to pop in, see the live reactions, or sort of live reactions, because I've already played it. But yeah, just be a part of the conversation. Who knows, I might use some clips from the stream in order to make the video. And yeah, I think that's all from me. Thanks again for watching. Have a good night.